Snow fell like needles from the iron-gray sky, each flake a tiny blade cutting through the fabric of the world. Eleanor Morrison felt the cold in her bones first, then in her lungs, then in the terrible silence of her infant daughter, who had stopped crying an hour ago. That silence terrified her more than the wind that screamed through the narrow alley between Miller's livery and the grain warehouse. Clara had cried every moment of their 3-day journey from Cheyenne, her wails growing weaker each mile, until finally the baby had simply stopped. Now she lay bundled against Ellie's chest, frighteningly still, her tiny lips blue beneath the threadbare blanket. Tommy clung to Ellie's skirt, his 4-year-old legs barely moving anymore. His purple fingers gripped the wool so tightly she could feel the pressure through layers of frozen fabric. He had stopped asking where they were going. He had stopped asking when they would eat. He simply held on and stumbled forward because his mother was still moving, and children that age still believed their mothers could do anything, could fix anything, could save them from anything. Ellie knew better. She had been powerless to save her husband Michael from the consumption that ate him alive over 6 months of coughing, blood into rags she boiled and boiled until her hands were raw. She had been powerless to stop the debt collectors who came 3 days after they buried him. She was powerless now. The boarding house on 3rd Street had turned them away. Mrs. Weatherby had stood in the doorway, her considerable bulk, blocking any view of the warm interior, her face pinched with something beyond mere refusal. There was satisfaction in it, a righteousness that Ellie recognized from a dozen other towns, a dozen other doorways. "We have no rooms for women of uncertain reputation." The words had been clipped, final delivered, with the absolute certainty of someone who believed themselves an instrument of moral judgment. The door had closed before Ellie could form a response, leaving them on the porch while snow accumulated on their shoulders like a burial shroud. The church had been worse. Reverend Gray had listened to her plea through the barely opened door, his eyes fixed somewhere above her head, refusing to meet her gaze. His words came out measured, rehearsed, as though he had delivered this speech before. "The church provides charity to the deserving poor, Mrs. Morrison. Your late husband's gambling debts are well known. The Lord helps those who help themselves and those who make righteous choices. Perhaps this hardship is intended to teach you something about the consequences of poor judgment. Come back when you have found employment and can demonstrate a commitment to Christian values." The door had clicked shut with a sound like a coffin lid. Ellie had stood there for 30 seconds, maybe more, watching frost form on the dark wood, feeling Tommy's weight against her leg, feeling Clara's terrible stillness against her heart. Then she had turned and walked back into the storm because there was nowhere else to go, and standing still meant death. She had tried the hotel. The proprietor had looked at her torn dress, her bruised face from the fall she had taken on the ice that morning, the children shivering in her arms, and his expression had shifted from pity to suspicion to something harder. "I don't run that kind of establishment." He had said his meaning clear enough that Ellie's face had burned despite the cold. She had not bothered to explain. She had simply left. Now she stumbled along the wooden walkway beside the stable, each step requiring conscious effort, her body operating on nothing but will, because everything else had been consumed. The letter crinkled in her coat pocket, the paper she had read 50 times, the words that had chased her from Cheyenne through 200 miles of winter across Wyoming territory. She could recite it from memory, every terrible syllable. The deadline it contained was 6 days away. 6 days to produce $2,000, or Harrison Blackwood would exercise his legal right to claim her children as indentured servants until the debt was satisfied. 6 days to save them from something worse than this storm, worse than freezing, worse than anything she could imagine. Her knees gave out beside a hitching post. The impact jarred through her bones, but she barely felt it. She lowered herself and the children as gently as she could, letting her back rest against the weathered wood. Tommy immediately burrowed into her side, pressing his face against her ribs. She wrapped her free arm around him and pulled both children close, making herself a windbreak, a shelter, the last defense between them and the white void that was consuming everything. "It's okay, babies." The words came out cracked, barely audible over the wind's howl. "Just hold on, just a little longer. We'll be warm soon. I promise," but promises were cheap currency when you had nothing left to trade. Michael had promised they would always be safe. He had promised the gambling was under control, just a few games to win back what they had lost, just one more night to break even. He had promised right up until the consumption made it impossible for him to speak his final words, A wet whisper she had leaned close to hear. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Take care of them. As if she needed to be told. As if she would do anything else. As if loving them was a choice rather than the most fundamental truth of her existence. She felt the cold now like a living thing wrapping around them, pressing in patient and implacable. Her thoughts began to scatter images from her life flashing behind her eyes in no particular order. Michael laughing on their wedding day, spinning her in the summer sun. Tommy as a newborn, his tiny hand gripping her finger with shocking strength. Her mother's face the day Ellie had left Boston to marry a Montana rancher's son, who had promised her adventure and a life bigger than the narrow streets and narrower minds of home. Clara's first smile 3 months ago, the moment of pure joy that had made Ellie believe briefly that they might survive this after all. People passed in the distance, blurred shapes moving through curtains of white. None of them saw the small family fading into the snow, or if they did, they looked away. Ellie did not call out to them. She had learned that lesson already today. Pride had burned away somewhere around mile 50 of their journey, but fear remained. Fear that drawing attention would bring the wrong kind of help. Fear that someone would recognize her name, remember the debts, send word back to Blackwood. Fear that the last thing she did before dying would be to lead the monster straight to her children's frozen bodies. Tommy's shivering had stopped. That was bad. Ellie knew enough about cold to understand what it meant when the shivering stopped. She pressed her face to his hair, trying to will warmth into him through breath and proximity and desperate love. Clara remained terrifyingly still against her chest. Ellie could not tell if the baby was breathing. She was too cold herself to feel anything clearly. Her fingers had gone numb 20 minutes ago. Her feet were blocks of ice in boots that had split their seams weeks before. This is how we die, she thought with a clarity that felt almost peaceful. The three of us together, frozen beside a stable in a town whose name I can barely remember. They'll find us in the morning and shake their heads and say what a shame, and someone will mention Michael's debts and gambling, and they'll decide we got what we deserved. And maybe they're right. Maybe this is justice for every bad choice, every moment I didn't see the truth, every time I believed his promises. The horse's hooves sounded like distant thunder, at first muffled by snow and wind, then closer, then stopping so near she could smell the animal's sweat and leather and something else, something like wood smoke and pine. Boots hit the ground with a heavy thud. Ellie tried to look up, but her neck would not cooperate. She saw dark wool, a coat hem, gloved hands reaching down. The terror that should have come did not. She was too far gone for fear. Ma'am. The voice was deep, roughened by weather and years, but gentle in a way that made something in Ellie's chest crack. She managed to lift her eyes. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, snow gathering on the wide brim of his black hat. His face was weathered, carved by sun and wind, into hard planes, but his eyes were different. Warm, sharp, concerned. They fixed on her with an intensity that felt like heat. How long have you been out here? Ellie's mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She tried again, forcing the words through cracked lips. I was trying to find help. The boarding house said they had no more rooms, and the church doors were locked. I didn't know where else to go. Her voice broke on the last word. Clara whimpered a sound so faint it was almost swallowed by the wind, but it was sound, it was life, and Ellie gasped with relief that brought tears freezing on her cheeks. The man stared at the children, really looked at them, and something terrible and fierce flashed across his face. Not anger at her, she realized. Anger at the world. He knelt slowly, lowering himself to her level with deliberate care, and began unbuttoning his coat. The wool was thick, lined with sheepskin, radiating warmth, even before he pulled it free and wrapped it around all three of them. The heat was shocking, painful, the most beautiful thing Ellie had ever felt. Come here. His voice had gone thick with something between urgency and resolve. Come here, all of you. Ellie froze her mind, struggling to process kindness it had stopped expecting. He lifted Clara carefully, holding the baby against his chest where body heat could reach her. Then he extended his other arm toward Tommy. I ain't leaving you here. Not in this storm. Not ever. You hear me? Ellie blinked, hard tears mixing with melting snow on her face. The question came out before she could stop it, fragile as thin glass. Why would you help us? The man met her gaze without wavering. Something in his expression suggested he understood the weight behind the question. All the times help had been denied, all the doors that had closed. Because no one should be left alone to freeze, and because I can see you've been fighting too long by yourself." He helped her stand, his arms steady beneath hers, and once she found her footing, he guided her toward his horse. The wind tore at them, but he kept himself between her and the worst of the storm, shielding her as though she were something precious, rather than something broken and worthless. The horse was massive, a dark bay gelding who stood calm despite the weather, well-trained and patient. When they reached the animal, the man lifted her up with surprising gentleness, placing Tommy in her lap and settling Clara back into her arms. Then he mounted behind her, one strong arm wrapping around all of them to keep them steady and warm. Ellie felt his chest against her back, solid and real heat radiating through layers of clothing. She had not been this close to another person since Michael died. She had not felt safe in longer than she could remember. "My ranch isn't far," his voice rumbled against her shoulder blade. "There's a fire waiting, food blankets, a place to rest." The horse pushed through deep drifts, moving with sure-footed confidence along a path invisible in the white chaos. Ellie felt something unfamiliar press against the walls of her chest, fragile and trembling, but unmistakably alive. Hope. She was afraid to name it, afraid it would shatter like everything else, but it was there. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to believe they might survive the night. The journey could not have been more than 20 minutes, but it felt both endless and impossibly brief. Ellie drifted in and out of awareness, her mind unable to maintain focus through the exhaustion and cold. She surfaced to find them cresting a rise, and suddenly, there it was appearing through the curtain of snow, like something from a fever dream. The ranch house sprawled across the landscape, built from dark timber and stone smoke curling from two chimneys. Yellow light glowed through frosted windows, warm and welcoming. A massive barn stood beside it, solid against the storm's fury, and beyond that she could see the dark shapes of other buildings, bunkhouses and sheds and structures whose purpose she could not identify. The man guided the horse to the wide front porch. Before they had fully stopped, the door flew open and a woman hurried out, older, her gray hair pulled back, her face creased with lines that spoke of frequent smiling. She took one look at Ellie and the children, and her expression shifted to immediate action. "Lord above, Cole, what happened, Cole?" So that was his name. Ellie stored away something solid to hold on to, found them freezing by the livery. He dismounted and reached up to lift Ellie down. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched wood, but he caught her, easily supporting her weight without apparent effort. "Get blankets and hot water. Now." The woman disappeared back inside. Cole carried Clara while guiding Ellie through the doorway, Tommy clinging to her hand with the last of his strength. The warmth hit them instantly, a wall of heat that made Ellie gasp as pain lanced through her frozen skin. The entryway opened into a large main room dominated by a stone fireplace, where logs crackled and popped, throwing dancing light across wooden floors and simple furniture that looked both comfortable and well-made. Cole knelt again to unwrap his coat, freeing the children. Clara's cry was stronger now, a full-throated wail of protest and confusion and returning life. Cole actually smiled, the expression transforming his hard features into something younger, lighter. "That's good, means she's waking up." The older woman returned with an armload of quilts and wool blankets, another woman following her carrying a steaming kettle and cloths. They moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping the children, rubbing small hands to restore circulation. Ellie watched through a haze of disbelief and overwhelming gratitude, unable to process that this was real, that they were safe, that strangers were helping without asking for anything in return. Cole turned back to her and knelt once more, his expression softening in the firelight. "You're safe now, you and your little ones." Ellie opened her mouth to thank him, but her body chose that moment to surrender. Exhaustion swept over her like a collapsing wave, everything she had held at bay through sheer will finally overwhelming her defenses. The room tilted. She felt herself falling forward, felt strong hands catch her before the darkness took everything. She surfaced to voices arguing in hushed tones somewhere above her head. The darkness pulled at her insistent, but the voices kept her tethered to consciousness by the thinnest thread. Her fever's dangerously high. The voice was male, older, carrying authority. Pneumonia, certainly. Malnutrition. Hypothermia. Her body's been fighting too many battles. The children are stabilizing, but she's in real danger. "What can we do?" Cole's voice rough with something Ellie could not name. "Keep her warm. Get fluids in her when she wakes. Watch for the fever to break. Beyond that, the older voice trailed off heavy with implication. We wait and we pray. She won't die. Cole spoke with absolute certainty as though death were something that could be refused through willpower alone. Not after everything it took to get here. Footsteps moved away. Ellie tried to open her eyes, but her lids were too heavy. She felt a cool cloth on her forehead, felt someone adjusting blankets around her. Then she drifted again down into fever dreams, where Michael coughed blood, and Harrison Blackwood smiled his terrible smile and snow fell forever burying everything. When she woke again, the light had changed dimmer, flickering. She was in a bed, a real bed with a soft mattress and clean sheets and quilts piled so high she could barely move beneath their weight. A fireplace crackled in the corner of the room, smaller than the main one, but throwing sufficient heat. The walls were dark wood, simple but well finished. A dresser stood against one wall, a chair beside the bed, a basin and pitcher on a small table. Ellie's throat felt like crushed glass, but she managed to turn her head. Cole sat in the chair, Tommy asleep in his lap, the boy's face pressed against the man's chest. Clara was not visible, but Ellie could hear the baby's breathing, see the edge of a cradle beside the bed. Both children were alive. Both children were safe. The relief was so intense it hurt worse than any physical pain. Cole noticed her eyes were open. He shifted carefully, not wanting to wake Tommy, and leaned forward. His face in the firelight looked older than she had first thought. Lines of grief and hard living etched deep, but there was kindness there too, and something else. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding. How are you feeling? Ellie tried to speak, but only managed to whisper. My children's safe. Doc Matthews checked them over. Tommy's got frostbite on 2 fingers, but nothing we can't treat. Your little girl is tougher than she looks. He paused, something flickering in his eyes. What's her name? Clara. Tommy. I'm Eleanor, but everyone calls me Ellie. Cole nodded slowly as though filing the information away somewhere important. I'm Cole Brennan. This is my ranch, Broken Pine. You're safe here as long as you need. Ellie's vision blurred with tears. She had cried so much in the past months, she thought herself empty, but apparently there was always more. Thank you. I don't know how to... You don't need to thank me. Cole's voice was firm but not unkind. Just rest. Get better. Everything else can wait. Tommy stirred in his sleep, his small hand fisting in Cole's shirt. The gesture was unconscious but somehow intimate, and Ellie saw something cross Cole's face, swift as a shadow. Pain. Loss. He looked down at the boy with an expression so raw, it made Ellie's chest ache. You're good with him. The words came out unbidden. Cole did not look up. I used to... He stopped, clearing his throat. Sleep now, Mrs. Morrison. We can talk later. But before Ellie could respond, the older woman from earlier bustled in carrying a tray with soup and bread. She set it on the bedside table and smiled warmly. I'm Sarah, Brennan Cole's aunt. I keep house here and mind the cooking. You gave us quite a scare, young lady. Sarah proceeded to help Ellie sit up, propping pillows behind her, fussing over the blankets, all while maintaining a steady stream of gentle chatter that required no responses. She spooned broth into Ellie's mouth with patient care, not rushing, letting Ellie take her time. The soup was rich and warm, chicken and vegetables, the first real food Ellie had eaten in days. Each spoonful felt like a small miracle. Cole stood carefully, lifting Tommy with practiced ease, and laid the boy on the bed beside Ellie. Tommy immediately curled against his mother, still sleeping, his breath evening out into the deep rhythm of exhausted childhood. Cole pulled the blankets up around him, his movements gentle, and for a moment his hand lingered on Tommy's head, the gesture almost unconscious. When he straightened, Sarah was watching him with an expression Ellie could not quite read. The older woman reached out and touched Cole's arm, something passing between them. A conversation conducted in silence. I'll sit with them tonight, Sarah's voice was soft. You should get some rest yourself. Cole hesitated, his eyes moving from Ellie to the children and back again. If the fever gets worse, I'll come get you immediately. Now go. You've done enough for one day. Cole nodded but did not move toward the door. Instead, he walked to the dresser and pulled out something from the top drawer, then crossed to where Ellie lay propped against the pillows. He held out a small object. Doc Matthews found this in your coat pocket. Thought you might want it nearby. Ellie's heart stopped. The letter. Harrison Blackwood's letter. She reached for it with trembling fingers, the paper familiar beneath her touch, and suddenly all the fear came rushing back, the brief respite of safety evaporating in the face of what was still waiting out there. Sarah noticed the reaction, her smile fading. What is it? Cole's jaw tightened. I don't know, but I think maybe we should find out. Ellie clutched the paper to her chest, protective and ashamed all at once. The words inside were humiliation made concrete proof of Michael's failures and her own, a document that reduced her children to chattel and herself to property. She could not bear for these people to see it, to know, to understand just how little value the world placed on them. But Sarah moved closer, her hands settling on Ellie's shoulder with surprising firmness. Whatever's in that letter, child, it can't be worse than dying in the snow. Let us help. Ellie's resistance crumbled. She was too tired, too grateful, too desperate. Her fingers loosened their grip, and Sarah took the paper, gently unfolding it with care. Cole came to stand beside his aunt, reading over her shoulder. Ellie watched their faces, watched understanding dawn, and then harden into something colder. Sarah finished first. She looked up at Cole, her expression grave. Lord have mercy. Cole took the letter from her hands, his eyes scanning the text again, as though checking for something he had missed. When he spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. Harrison Blackwood. You know him? Ellie forced the question past the constriction in her throat. I know of him. Cole's hands tightened on the paper, crumpling the edges. Land speculator. Loan shark. Some say worse. He wants my children. Ellie's voice broke on the words. He says Michael owed him $2,000. Says if I don't pay in 6 days, he has legal right to take Tommy and Clara as indentured servants until the debt is satisfied. But it's a lie. It's all a lie. Michael never borrowed from him. I've been through every paper, every receipt. This contract he claims exists, I've never seen it. But it doesn't matter because he has a judge in Cheyenne who will enforce it anyway. And I have nothing, no money, no proof, nowhere to go. Sarah's arms came around her, cutting off the desperate flood of words. Hush now. You're not alone anymore. We'll figure this out. Cole was already moving toward the door, the letter still in his hand. I'm riding to town. Doc Matthews needs to see this. Sarah's head snapped up. In this storm, Cole, don't be foolish. I've ridden in worse. His voice held no room for argument. If Blackwood's making moves with the law, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. I'll be back before dawn. He was gone before Sarah could protest further, his boots heavy on the wooden floors, the front door opening and closing with a blast of cold air. Sarah sighed deeply, shaking her head, but there was something like pride in her expression too. That man. Once he decides to protect something, heaven help anyone who tries to stop him. Ellie felt fresh tears on her face. I don't understand. Why would he do this for strangers? Sarah settled into the chair Cole had vacated, her weathered hands folding in her lap. The firelight caught silver in her gray hair and deepened the lines around her eyes. Cole's not a complicated man in some ways. He sees what's right and he does it. But there's more to it than that. She paused, studying Ellie's face as though deciding how much to reveal. 3 years ago this winter, there was another storm. Worse than this one, if you can believe it. Cole was away buying cattle in Montana, gone for nearly 2 weeks. His wife Rebecca was here with their baby son Daniel, just 6 months old. The old cabin they'd been living in while building this house, the roof collapsed under the snow weight. Cole came home to find he found them both frozen. Ellie's hand went to her mouth, horror and understanding flooding through her in equal measure. That's why he couldn't leave us. That's why Sarah nodded slowly. He sees them in every person left out in the cold. And he can't save them, his wife and baby, but he can save others. Has to save others. It's the only way he knows to live with it. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling. Clara breathing softly in her cradle, Tommy warm against Ellie's side. Then Sarah reached out and took Ellie's hand, her grip firm and strong. But there's something else you should know. She pulled something from her pocket, a piece of folded cloth. When we were getting you out of those frozen clothes, this fell from the folds of your dress. She unfolded the cloth to reveal a locket, tarnished silver, small and delicate. Ellie recognized it immediately. Her mother had given it to her on her wedding day, the only piece of family jewelry she had brought west. I know this locket. Sarah's voice was soft with wonder, or one very like it. My younger sister Catherine worked as a nurse in Boston, must be nearly 30 years ago now. She took terrible sick pneumonia that settled in her lungs. There was a young nursing student who cared for her through it, a girl with gentle hands and a big heart. Catherine survived when the doctor said she wouldn't, and she always credited that girl. Before Catherine left Boston, she gave her a locket exactly like this one, said it was the only valuable thing she owned, and she wanted the girl to have it as thanks. Ellie stared at the locket, her mind struggling to make connections through the fever haze. My mother was a nursing student in Boston. She told me about a patient she saved, a woman named Catherine who gave her this locket before leaving the city. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Then this is the very same one. Lord works in mysterious ways, doesn't he? You saved my sister's life 30 years ago through your mother's hands. Now maybe we can return the favor. The weight of coincidence, of fate, of whatever forces had brought her to this place on this night felt suddenly crushing. Ellie closed her eyes, clutching the locket to her chest. I don't believe in signs. After everything with Michael, after all the prayers that went unanswered, I stopped believing in anything but chance and bad luck. Sarah squeezed her hand. Maybe. Or maybe you walked 200 miles through winter with two children barely alive, survived, when you should have died a dozen times over, and collapsed in the exact spot where the one man who couldn't leave you to freeze would find you. Call it what you want, child, but you're here, you're alive, and we're going to keep you that way. Ellie wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that safety could be real, that kindness was not just a prelude to betrayal, that the universe contained more than cruelty and loss. But belief required strength she did not have. Instead, she simply held Sarah's hand and watched the fire burn, and tried not to think about Harrison Blackwood and his terrible letter, and the fact that Cole Brennan was riding through a storm to help people he did not know, risking himself for strangers. And she did not understand why, but she was grateful beyond words. Tommy stirred beside her, his small face scrunching in sleep. Ellie smoothed his hair with her free hand, marveling at how warm he felt, how alive. Just hours ago, she had been certain she would lose him. Now he slept in clean sheets beside a warm fire in a house that felt impossibly safe. The contrast was so stark it felt unreal, a dream she would wake from to find herself still freezing in the snow. Sarah must have seen something in her expression because she leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. This is real. You're really here. Really safe. I know it's hard to trust after what you've been through, but we're not going to let anything happen to you or those babies. Cole would die first, and I'm not much use for dying, so I'll fight alongside him. The simple certainty in her words broke something in Ellie's chest, some last defense she had been holding. She wept, then properly wept for the first time since Michael died, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Sarah held her through it, one hand on her shoulder, the other still gripping her fingers, anchoring her to this moment, this room, this impossible mercy. When the storm passed, both inside and out, Ellie found herself hollow, but strangely lighter. She lay back against the pillows, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the fever. I should sleep. I know I should, but I'm afraid. Of what? That I'll wake up and this will have been a dream. That I'll be back in the snow with my children dying and no one coming to save us. Sarah smiled, sad and understanding. I'll stay right here, and when you wake, I'll still be in this chair. That's a promise. Ellie's eyes were already closing, the fever and exhaustion pulling her down into darkness that felt for the first time in months, not like drowning, but like rest. Her last conscious thought was of Cole Brennan riding through the storm with her letter in his pocket, and she sent out a wordless prayer to whatever might be listening, that he would return safely, that this man who owed her nothing but had given her everything would not become another casualty of her cursed existence. The fire burned low through the night. Sarah kept her vigil, watching the children breathe, watching Ellie's face for signs of crisis, listening to the wind shriek around the house like a living thing searching for a way in. Somewhere out in that white chaos, Cole rode toward town, toward answers, toward a confrontation he did not yet understand. And in Cheyenne, 200 miles south, Harrison Blackwood sat in his office and smiled at papers spread across his desk, papers that would allow him to claim Eleanor Morrison and her children as property papers that represented the culmination of plans set in motion long before Michael Morrison's death. But none of them knew yet what forces they had set in motion. None of them understood that this night, this storm, this desperate rescue was the first domino falling in a chain that would reshape all their lives. The only truth visible in that moment was simpler, more immediate. A widow and her children had been saved from freezing. A man haunted by failure had been given a second chance at redemption. And somewhere in the space between grief and hope, between death and life, between the storm outside and the warmth within, something fragile and essential was beginning to take root. Sarah watched Ellie sleep and thought about lockets and sisters and the strange mathematics of mercy. In the cradle, Clara sighed in her sleep, her tiny face peaceful. On the bed, Tommy curled tighter against his mother's side, his purple fingers slowly regaining their color. And in town, Cole Brennan pounded on Doc Matthews' door while snow piled against the buildings and the night stretched on toward dawn. Dawn broke gray and cold, the storm's fury spent, but its legacy visible in drifts that buried fences and transformed the landscape into an alien geography of white. Ellie woke to find Sarah exactly where she had promised to be, dozing upright in the chair with a quilt pulled around her shoulders. The older woman's eyes opened at the first sound of movement, instantly alert despite the interrupted night. "Morning, you look considerably more human than you did yesterday." Ellie pushed herself up carefully, testing her body's responses. The fever had broken, leaving her weak but clear-headed. Her throat still ached, but the crushing weight on her chest had eased. Beside her, Tommy slept on, his breathing deep and even. Clara stirred in her cradle, making soft sounds that would soon escalate to demands for feeding. "How do you feel?" Sarah was already up, moving to check Clara, her movements efficient and practiced. "Like I've been trampled by horses, but alive." Ellie's voice came out rough but stronger than before. "Did Cole return before midnight?" Sarah lifted Clara from the cradle, the baby's face scrunched in preparation for crying. "He's sleeping now. Rode hard through the worst of it to see Doc Matthews. Nearly gave the old man a heart attack pounding on his door at that hour." "What did the doctor say?" Sarah's expression grew serious as she brought Clara to Ellie, helping position the baby for feeding. "That letter is real enough in terms of legal paper and signatures. Whether the debt itself is real? That's another question. Doc says Blackwood's been working this territory for years, finding widows and desperate folk, offering loans at rates that can never be repaid, then using legal mechanisms to take everything. Children property, whatever's valuable. Doc's tried to warn people, but Blackwood has a judge in Cheyenne who rubber stamps everything he does." Ellie felt the familiar dread settling back into her bones. For a few hours, she had allowed herself to hope, to believe safety was possible. Now reality reasserted itself with crushing weight. "So there's nothing to be done. I have 6 days and no money, and he'll take my children, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it." Sarah sat back down, her weathered face thoughtful. "I didn't say that. Doc's sending telegrams to the territorial capital, calling in some favors. Cole's got friends in places that matter. And you're not alone anymore, which counts for more than you might think." A knock sounded at the door before Ellie could respond. Cole entered, carrying a tray laden with food, his face drawn with fatigue but his eyes sharp and alert. He had changed clothes, his dark hair still damp from washing, and Ellie noticed for the first time the scar that ran along his left jaw, pale against weathered skin. "Thought you might be hungry." His voice was carefully neutral, but Ellie caught something underneath, a current of protectiveness that made her chest tighten. "Sarah says the fever broke, thanks to you both." Ellie accepted the tray he set across her lap, the scent of eggs and bacon, making her stomach clench with sudden desperate hunger. "I don't know how to repay this kindness." Cole's jaw tightened slightly. "You don't repay kindness. You accept it and maybe pass it forward when you're able." He paused, glancing at Tommy, who was starting to wake. "Doc Matthews wants to check you and the children again today. Make sure there's no lasting damage from the cold. He'll be by this afternoon." Tommy's eyes opened fully and fixed immediately on Cole, recognition and something like joy transforming his small face. "Mr. Crane, you came back." The naked happiness in those words hit Cole visibly, a flinch so brief Ellie almost missed it. He crouched beside the bed, putting himself at Tommy's eye level. "Course I came back. Made you a promise, didn't I?" Tommy nodded seriously, his purple-tinged fingers reaching out to touch Cole's hand with a trust that made Ellie's throat close. Children had instincts about people, could sense safety or danger with an accuracy adults lost. Tommy had decided Cole was safe, had claimed him with the absolute certainty only a 4-year-old could muster. Sarah stood gathering her shawl. "I'll leave you to eat in peace, Cole. When you're done here, Marcus needs to talk to you about the south fence line. Storm took down a good section." Cole nodded and Sarah left, closing the door quietly behind her. The room felt suddenly smaller, with just the 4 of them, more intimate. Ellie ate mechanically, the food restoring strength to limbs that felt hollowed out. Cole moved to the window, staring out at the transformed landscape, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the morning light. I need to know everything about Michael's debts. His voice was quiet but firm. Every detail you can remember. Who he borrowed from, how much, what the terms were. Everything. Ellie swallowed hard, shame burning through her despite the food's warmth. He started gambling 2 years ago. Small games at first, poker, in saloons. He said it was just fun, a way to relax after working the ranch. Then he started losing more than winning and borrowed money to chase his losses. By the time I understood how bad it was, we owed $3,000 to various creditors in Cheyenne. 3,000, not two. Michael paid some of it back before he got sick. The remaining debts, the legitimate ones I have records for, bills of sale, IOU notes, witnesses, those amount to maybe $800. I've been working to pay them down, taking in sewing cleaning houses. But Harrison Blackwood's claim of $2,000, I've never seen documentation for it before that letter. Michael never mentioned borrowing from him. Cole turned from the window, his eyes intent. Did Michael keep records? Account books? Letters? Anything? Everything burned. Ellie's voice went flat with the memory. The cabin we were renting in Cheyenne caught fire 3 weeks after Michael died. The landlord said I left a lamp burning, but I know I didn't. Everything we owned was destroyed. The only things I saved were what I was wearing, the children, and a small bag I'd packed in case we had to leave quickly. That's when Blackwood's letter arrived, claiming I now owed him instead of Michael, saying the debt transferred to me as widow. Cole's expression darkened. Convenient timing. Fire destroys all evidence, then he produces a contract no one can verify or dispute. That's what I thought. But who's going to believe me? A widow of a gambler and drunk, no property, no standing, no proof. Blackwood has lawyers and judges and documents with official seals. Tommy had been listening with the intensity of a child who understood more than adults credited. He looked up at Cole with wide eyes. Is the bad man going to take us away from Mama? Cole's face softened instantly. He knelt again, bringing himself to Tommy's level, with that same careful attention to the boy's dignity. Not if I have anything to say about it, and I'm a pretty stubborn man when I decide something needs doing. Tommy considered this gravely, then nodded as though Cole had made a solemn vow. In the child's mind, perhaps he had. Ellie watched the exchange with an ache in her chest that was part gratitude, part grief, for all the times Michael had made promises he could not keep. Doc Matthews arrived after lunch, a compact man with silver hair and sharp eyes behind wire spectacles. He examined each of them with thorough efficiency, his questions direct but not unkind. Tommy's frostbite was healing well, would leave no permanent damage. Clara was underweight but responding to proper nutrition. Ellie's pneumonia was resolving, though her lungs would be sensitive for months. You all got closer to death than most people ever do, and lived to speak of it. Doc packed his instruments back into his worn leather bag. Another hour in that storm and we'd be having a very different conversation. After he left, Sarah insisted Ellie rest more while she minded the children. Ellie protested weakly, but exhaustion won. She drifted in and out of sleep through the afternoon, waking once to find Tommy gone and Clara sleeping peacefully in Sarah's arms as the older woman rocked and hummed softly. The domesticity of the scene, the casual warmth, made Ellie's eyes sting. This was what family should feel like. This was what she had wanted to build with Michael before everything fell apart. Evening came too quickly. Ellie was stronger now, able to walk without assistance, and she insisted on joining everyone for dinner. The dining room was larger than the bedroom, with a long table that could seat 12, but tonight held only 5. Cole sat at the head, Sarah beside him, and they had settled Ellie and Tommy across from her, with Clara sleeping in a basket at Ellie's feet. 2 ranch hands joined them, Marcus Webb and a younger man named Charlie, both treating Ellie with polite deference that felt almost foreign after months of scorn. The food was simple but abundant, beef stew and fresh bread and vegetables that must have come from a root cellar given the season. Conversation flowed easily, Marcus discussing ranch business with Cole, while Sarah and Charlie debated the merits of different pie recipes. Tommy ate with single-minded intensity, making up for days of near starvation, and Ellie found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it, the normalcy. Then Charlie mentioned the south fence repairs would take at least a week and require supplies from town, and Cole's expression shifted, closing off. I'll handle the town run myself. Can't be putting that on you boys with everything else that needs doing. Marcus shot him a look Ellie could not quite interpret. Boss, you sure that's wise after last night and the weather being what it is, I'm sure. The finality in Cole's tone ended the discussion, but Ellie noticed Marcus and Sarah exchanging worried glances. Something was being left unsaid, some concern they were protecting her from knowing. The realization stung. She was already a burden, already causing problems she did not fully understand. After dinner, Cole found her in the main room where she stood by the fire with Clara, rocking the baby gently while Tommy played with the wooden blocks Sarah had produced from somewhere. The evening light slanted through windows, gilding everything in warm tones that made the scene feel almost unreal in its peacefulness. You're good with her. Cole's voice came from behind, making Ellie startle slightly. She's easy. Ellie smoothed Clara's dark hair so much like Michael's. Tommy was colicky as a baby cried for hours on end. Clara's been gentle from the start, as if she understood we couldn't afford the noise. She turned to find Cole watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Not pity, but something deeper, more complex, understanding perhaps or shared grief, recognizing itself in another. I need to take you to town tomorrow. His words were measured careful. Need to file some papers with the land office and figure you should come along. Get you registered at the hotel, establish that you're under my protection. Might make Blackwood think twice about moving too quick. The hotel Ellie's stomach dropped. You mean I should stay there with the children? Cole's brow furrowed in confusion, then cleared as he understood. No, I mean establishing a paper trail that you're my guest under my legal protection as a property owner and citizen in good standing. Protection that extends to anyone staying at my ranch. Makes it harder for Blackwood to claim you're a vagrant or desperate or without resources. But you're staying here, long as you need or want. The relief was dizzying. Ellie had not realized how much the thought of leaving terrified her until faced with not having to do it. Why are you doing all this? The question escaped before she could stop it. You don't know me, don't owe me anything. This is more than simple Christian charity. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on Tommy rather than her. The boy had built a tower with the blocks and was now carefully placing each piece to make it taller. 3 years ago, I lost everything that mattered. His voice was low, meant only for her. My wife Rebecca and my son Daniel. They died in a storm not much different from the one yesterday. I was away, thought I had time, thought I could finish the cattle drive and get home before the weather turned. I was wrong. Ellie's free hand moved unconsciously toward him, then stopped uncertain. Cole continued still, not meeting her eyes. Came back to find the old cabin, collapsed them frozen inside. Daniel was 6 months old, same age as your Clara. Rebecca was trying to protect him, wrapped around him, but the cold got them both. I buried them on the hill behind the house where you can see the mountains. Swore I'd never let that happen again, if I could prevent it. Now he did look at her, and his eyes held an intensity that was almost painful to meet. So when I saw you and those children dying in the snow, I didn't see strangers. I saw another chance, a chance to do what I couldn't do before. Does that make sense more than you know? Ellie's voice came out thick with emotion. Michael died slowly coughing himself to death while I could do nothing but watch. I was a nurse's assistant once before we married, had training new medicine. But there's no cure for consumption, no treatment that works. I was useless. Could do nothing but hold his hand and count his last breaths. They stood in the firelight, two people bound by grief and failure, by the terrible knowledge of being powerless when it mattered most. Clara made a small sound, and Ellie automatically adjusted her hold emotion so practiced it required no thought. Maybe we're both trying to save people we couldn't save before. Cole's words were quiet but carried weight. Maybe that's all right. Maybe that's enough. Before Ellie could respond, Tommy's tower collapsed with a clatter that made Clara startle. The boy looked up, eyes wide with distress, and Cole moved immediately, crossing the room to kneel beside him. That's all right. These things fall sometimes. Want to build it again? I'll help. Tommy's face split into a grin, and he began gathering blocks with renewed enthusiasm. Cole settled on the floor, his large hands moving pieces into position, and Ellie watched them with a sensation like something breaking and reforming in her chest. This man who had lost his son was showing her son how to build towers. This man who owed them nothing was giving them everything. And she did not know how to accept it without feeling like she was taking something she had no right to claim. Sarah appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Cole, there's someone at the door for you. Says it's urgent. Cole rose in one fluid motion, his expression shifting to wariness. Who wouldn't give a name? Just said you'd wanted to hear what he has to say. Cole moved toward the entryway, his hand automatically checking his hip, where Ellie now noticed a gun belt hung. She had not registered it before, but of course he would be armed. This was ranch country territory, where law was often what you made it. The realization brought home how little she actually knew about Cole Brennan, this man she was trusting with her children's lives. Voices murmured in the entryway, too low to distinguish words. Then Cole's voice rose sharp with anger. You're not welcome on my property. Get off before I help you off. A different voice responded, smooth and cultured, and somehow oily despite the distance. Now, Mr. Brennan, let's not be hasty. I'm simply here to check on my property. Make sure Mrs. Morrison and the children are being properly cared for. Ellie's blood turned to ice. Harrison Blackwood. She knew that voice from the one time they had met when he had appeared at her door in Cheyenne 3 days after the fire letter in hand, smile on his face like a wolf sizing up a wounded deer. Sarah moved instantly, positioning herself between Ellie and the door. Stay here. Don't let him see you react. But Ellie was already moving. Clara clutched tight against her chest, maternal instinct overriding fear. She reached the entryway to find Cole blocking the doorway, his body a wall between the interior and whatever stood outside. Over his shoulder, she glimpsed a tall figure, silver-haired and well-dressed, entirely too refined for a frontier ranch. Blackwood's eyes found her immediately, and his smile widened. Mrs. Morrison, how delightful to see you looking so well. I was quite concerned when you disappeared from Cheyenne without notice. Cole's voice was granite. She's under my protection. You have no business with her. Oh, but I do. Blackwood pulled papers from his coat, unfolding them with a flourish. I have a contract properly notarized and witnessed showing that her late husband owed me $2,000 secured against his family's labor. Since Mr. Morrison is deceased and Mrs. Morrison has no means of payment, the debt transfers to me in the form of indentured servitude for herself and both children until such time as the amount is satisfied. He held the papers out toward Cole, who made no move to take them. That contract is bullshit, and you know it. I'm afraid the territorial court disagrees. Blackwood's smile never wavered. But I'm not an unreasonable man. I'm willing to extend the deadline to 30 days if Mrs. Morrison agrees to certain conditions. His eyes traveled over Ellie in a way that made her skin crawl. She pulled Clara tighter, taking an involuntary step backward. Cole moved forward instead, his presence radiating threat. Get off me hand. Blackwood raised his hands in mock surrender papers, still clutched in one gloved hand. I'm leaving. But Mrs. Morrison should know that I'll be back in 6 days with the sheriff to collect what's owed to me. Unless, of course, payment is rendered in full before then. He turned to go, then paused, looking back at Ellie with that terrible smile. Your husband took something from me, Mrs. Morrison. You'll replace it. One way or another. Then he was gone, disappearing into the winter evening, and Cole slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frame. He stood with his back to them, breathing hard, one hand pressed flat against the wood. That son of a bitch. Sarah was already moving, guiding Ellie back to the main room, taking Clara from her shaking hands. Tommy had stopped playing with blocks and was watching with wide, frightened eyes. Is that the bad man? Mama Ellie could not make her voice work. Sarah answered for her, her tone carefully calm. That's just a man who thinks he's more important than he is. Don't you worry about him, sweetling. Your mama and Mr. Cole have everything under control. But they did not. Ellie could see it in the tension of Cole's shoulders when he returned in the grim set of his mouth. They were fighting something larger than one man's greed, fighting a system designed to let people like Blackwood prey on people like her. Cole crossed to the fireplace and stood staring into the flames for a long moment before speaking. I need to ride to town first thing tomorrow. Talk to the sheriff, see if there's any legal angle we're missing. He turned to face Ellie directly. That means I'll need you and the children to stay here with Sarah and Marcus. Don't leave the house. Don't answer the door to anyone but Doc Matthews. Understood. Ellie nodded, her throat too tight for words. Sarah spoke up, practical as always. I'll keep watch. Got the shotgun, and I know how to use it. Cole's expression softened slightly when he looked at his aunt. I know you do. Just hoping it won't come to that. But they all knew it might. Violence hung in the air like smoke inevitable, as the winter cold, and Ellie felt the familiar despair creeping back. She had dragged these good people into danger. Her presence, her problems, her cursed existence was pulling them towards something dark. As if reading her thoughts, Cole crossed the room and knelt in front of where she sat, putting himself at eye level, just as he had done with Tommy. Don't. His voice was firm, but not unkind. Whatever you're thinking, stop. This isn't your fault. Men like Blackwood exist because we let them exist. Because we turn away when they prey on the vulnerable. I'm done turning away. But I'm putting you at risk, you and Sarah and everyone here. Maybe I should what Cole's eyes bored into hers. Go back out into the cold. Let him take your children. Give up because fighting is hard. Ellie's eyes filled with tears. She was tired of crying. I'm so tired of fighting. I've been fighting for so long, and I'm just so tired. Then rest. Cole's hand covered hers warm and steady. Rest and let someone else fight for you for a while. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. The simple kindness of it broke her. Ellie wept not the desperate sobs of the night before, but quieter, deeper, the tears of someone who had finally found a safe place to acknowledge how much it hurt. Cole did not try to stop her or fix it or make it better with empty words. He simply stayed there, his hand on hers, solid and real and present. When the storm passed, Ellie found herself empty, but somehow lighter. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands. I'm sorry, I don't usually fall apart like this. You're entitled. Cole stood his knees cracking slightly. Been through more than most people face in a lifetime. Little falling apart is understandable. Tommy had abandoned his blocks and climbed into Ellie's lap, his small arms wrapping around her neck. Don't be sad, Mama. Mr. Cole said he won't let the bad man take us. Ellie held her son close, breathing in his little boy's smell of soap and innocence. I know, baby. I know he did. But as the evening wore on and they settled into the routines of bedtime, Ellie could not shake the image of Blackwood's smile, the predatory gleam in his eyes when he looked at her. He was not a man who took no for an answer. He was not a man who would give up because Cole Brennan stood in his way. And the deadline was 6 days. 6 days to produce money they did not have, to find evidence that did not exist, to fight a system designed to protect men exactly like him. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had gone quiet, Ellie lay awake staring at the ceiling. The bedroom was warm, comfortable, safe in all the ways that mattered, but her mind would not rest. She kept hearing Blackwood's words. Your husband took something from me. What had Michael taken? Money, obviously, or Blackwood claimed he had. But there was something else in the way he had said it, something personal and dark. A soft knock at the door made her start. Cole's voice came through the wood quiet enough not to wake the children. You still awake? Yes. Come in. He entered carrying a lamp, the light casting shadows across his weathered face. He looked older in the dim glow, the lines of grief and hard living more pronounced. Couldn't sleep either. He set the lamp on the dresser, keeping his distance. Thought you might want to know what I'm planning for tomorrow. Ellie pushed herself up against the pillows, pulling a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. I want to know everything. No more protecting me from information. I've earned the right to understand what we're facing. Cole nodded slowly, respect flickering in his eyes. Fair enough. Tomorrow I'll talk to Sheriff Porter, see what legal options exist. I'll also visit the telegraph office, send word to some people I know in the territorial government. Doc Matthews is reaching out to a lawyer friend in Laramie who specializes in debt cases. We're going to fight this through every legitimate channel available. And if the legitimate channels don't work, then we find other ways. Cole's voice was flat factual. Blackwood's not the only one with resources and connections. I've got friends who owe me favors. I've got money to hire lawyers or investigators or whatever else we need. And if it comes down to it, I've got men who'll stand between you and him with guns loaded and safeties off. The casual mention of violence should have frightened Ellie. Instead, she felt a fierce gratitude that surprised her with its intensity. Why, though? She asked the question that had been haunting her since he pulled her from the snow. Really, why? You say it's about your wife and son, about second chances. But there's more to it than that. I can see it in your face when you look at us. Cole was quiet for so long, Ellie thought he would not answer. Then he moved to the window, staring out at darkness punctuated by snow's pale glow. Rebecca and I, we wanted a big family. 5, 6 kids, fill this house with noise and life. We had Daniel and thought there would be more, thought we had all the time in the world. Then the storm came, and I lost both chances at once. Lost my son, lost any possibility of more children because Rebecca was my wife. And I can't, he stopped, his voice going rough. I can't replace her. Won't try. But these past 3 years, this house has been so quiet, so empty. And then you showed up with Tommy and Clara, and suddenly there's noise again, life again, purpose again. He turned back to face her, and his eyes held something raw and honest that made Ellie's breath catch. I'm not trying to replace my family, but maybe I can build something new, something that honors what I lost by protecting what I found. Does that make any sense at all? Perfect sense. Ellie's voice came out barely above a whisper. Because I feel the same way about you and Sarah, about this place. Like maybe I can build something new too. Something that honors Michael's memory by giving our children the life he wanted for them, but couldn't provide. They looked at each other across the lamplit room, two people scarred by loss, bound by circumstance, reaching towards something neither quite dared to name. Then Clara stirred in her sleep, making soft baby sounds, and the moment broke. Cole picked up his lamp. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. After he left, Ellie lay back down, but sleep remained elusive. She thought about Michael, about the good man he had been before gambling consumed him. She thought about Cole, about the life he was offering, without ever saying the words directly. She thought about her children sleeping peacefully in a warm house, safe for now, but threatened by forces she could not control. And she thought about Harrison Blackwood's smile, the promise in his eyes that was really a threat. Whatever Michael had taken from him, whatever debt was real or fabricated, Blackwood wanted more than money. He wanted her, wanted to own her, control her, break her. She had seen it in men before, that particular hunger that had nothing to do with desire and everything to do with power. Tomorrow, Cole would ride to town and try to find legal solutions. But Ellie understood something he perhaps did not, something she had learned in the months since Michael died. The law protected men like Blackwood. The law was written by men like Blackwood. Fighting through legitimate channels meant fighting on his ground by his rules with judges he owned and sheriffs he paid. If they were going to win, they would need to fight differently. And Ellie was done being helpless, done being a victim, done letting men decide her fate. She had survived Michael's death and the fire and 200 miles of winter. She had kept her children alive when any reasonable person would have given up. She had something Blackwood did not expect, could not account for, would not see coming. She had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. That made her dangerous in ways he could not imagine. The lamp burned low and eventually guttered out, leaving the room in darkness, punctuated only by the fire's dying glow. Ellie finally slept, but her dreams were troubled, filled with shadowy figures and falling snow, and a silver-haired man whose smile promised terrible things. When she woke just before dawn, her first thought was clarity sharpened to a knife's edge. Whatever happened next, whatever she had to do, she would not let Blackwood take her children. Even if it meant sacrificing everything else. Even if it meant leaving this warm house and the man who had saved her. Even if it meant walking back into the cold. But she hoped desperately it would not come to that. She hoped Cole's legal channels would work, that justice existed somewhere in the corrupted system, that good people could still triumph over evil through proper means. She hoped. But she no longer believed in hope alone. Hope required action. Hope required will. And if the law failed them, if Blackwood came with his sheriff and his papers and his terrible smile, Ellie would be ready. She would fight. And this time she would not fight alone. Cole left before dawn, riding through snow that reflected the first gray light like hammered steel. Ellie watched from the window as he disappeared into the whiteness, Marcus riding beside him as far as the property line, before turning back to the ranch. Sarah came to stand beside her, Clara balanced on one hip. He'll be careful. He's not a reckless man, just a determined one. I know, but determination doesn't stop bullets or corrupt judges. Sarah's hand found Ellie's shoulder, squeezing gently. You're learning fast, too fast maybe. There's still room for hope in this world. Hope is what desperate people cling to when they've got nothing else. I need more than hope now. The day stretched long and tense. Ellie tried to occupy herself with household tasks, helping Sarah with laundry and cooking, playing with Tommy, who seemed to sense the adult's anxiety and grew clingy. Every sound from outside made her start expecting Blackwood to return, or worse, the sheriff with legal papers and guns. But the only visitors were ranch hands coming in for meals, their boots stamping snow on the porch, their voices carefully casual around her, as though she might shatter if they spoke too directly about the situation. Doc Matthews arrived mid-afternoon, his black bag in hand, but his purpose clearly not medical. "Mrs. Morrison, might I have a word?" His voice carried weight that suggested this was not a social call. They settled in the small study off the main room, Sarah joining them without invitation. Doc pulled papers from his bag, spreading them on the desk with careful precision. "I've spent the morning examining every legal document I could find related to Harrison Blackwood's lending practices. The man's been working this territory for 5 years, and I've documented at least 7 cases similar to yours. Widows, desperate men, families in crisis, all claiming they owed him money, all producing contracts that appeared legitimate." And Ellie leaned forward, hands gripped tight in her lap. "And none of them hold up to scrutiny." Doc tapped one document with a gnarled finger. "The notary stamps are real, but the dates don't match the notary's travel schedules. The witness signatures belong to people who've never lived in Wyoming territory. The legal language is copied nearly word for word from legitimate contracts, but small details are wrong things only a lawyer would notice. So they're forgeries, professional ones, but yes." Doc's expression was grim. "Problem is proving it in court. Blackwood has Judge Morrison in his pocket. Yes, same last name as yours, no relation I'm aware of. The judge rubber stamps everything Blackwood brings before him. I've tried going to the territorial marshal, but without hard evidence of specific crimes, they can't intervene in civil debt matters." Ellie felt the familiar despair rising but pushed it down with effort. "Then what can we do?" Doc pulled another paper from his bag, this one covered in his own handwriting. "I've been tracking something else. 3 women Blackwood claimed as indentured servants over the past 4 years. All disappeared within 6 months of being taken into his custody. No records of where they went, no death certificates, no sightings, just gone." Sarah's face had gone pale. "You think he killed them? I think he sold them." Doc's words dropped like stones into dark water. "There's a human trafficking network operating out of San Francisco, moving women to mining camps and railroad construction sites where men outnumber women 50 to 1. Girls disappear all the time, and no one asks questions because they're poor or foreign or considered disposable." Ellie's blood went cold. "You're saying if Blackwood gets legal custody of me, he'll sell me like livestock? And your children?" Doc did not flinch from the terrible truth. "Maybe to different places, maybe together, but either way, you'd vanish and the law would consider it legitimate because you'd be his legal property for the duration of the debt servitude." Sarah stood abruptly, pacing to the window with barely contained fury. "This is America. We fought a war to end slavery. How is this allowed to happen? Because women and children aren't full citizens under the law." Doc's voice was bitter with long years of seeing injustice rationalized. "Because judges look the other way when the victim is poor or foreign or female. Because men like Blackwood have money and power, and as both to corrupt systems designed to protect people." Ellie forced herself to think past the horror to focus on what mattered. "Can you prove any of this? Can you show the pattern to someone who would act on it?" "I'm trying. I've sent telegrams to the territorial capital, to federal marshals, to a lawyer friend in Laramie who specializes in these cases. But Ellie, you need to understand something." He looked at her directly, his old eyes kind but unflinching. "Even if we prove every contract is forged, even if we expose the trafficking network, even if we bring down Blackwood completely, it won't happen in 6 days. The wheels of justice grind slow. You could win eventually and still lose everything that matters in the meantime." The words settled over the room like ash after a fire. They all understood what he was not saying directly. They needed time. Time they did not have. Cole returned as darkness fell, snow crusting his hat and shoulders. His face was set in hard lines that told the story before he spoke. Sarah handed him coffee while Ellie waited with sick dread for the confirmation she already knew was coming. "Sheriff Porter is Blackwood's man, bought and paid for. He showed me the legal documents, all properly filed and certified. Far as the law is concerned, Blackwood has legitimate claim on Ellie and the children unless the debt is paid in full before the deadline." Marcus had followed Cole inside, stamping snow from his boots. The foreman was a solid man in his late 30s, steady and competent, and he looked angry in a way Ellie had not seen before. It's worse than that, boss. I did some asking around while you were with the sheriff. Blackwood's been buying up property all along the South Range. Paid cash well over market value. Nobody understood why until today. Why Cole's attention sharpened like a blade. Railroads coming through. Marcus pulled a crumpled newspaper from his coat. Union Pacific is planning a spur line from Cheyenne to the Montana mines. The route survey isn't public yet, but word's leaking out. And the proposed route runs right through your property. Right through the land Blackwood's been acquiring around you. Sarah's intake of breath was sharp. So this isn't just about Ellie. He wants your ranch. He wants everything. Marcus spread the newspaper on the table, pointing to a small article. Railroads offering land prices 30 times current value to secure right-of-way. Blackwood's been positioning himself to own the entire corridor. Only problem is, your ranch sits right in the middle. He can't complete the land deal without it. Cole stood motionless, processing this information with visible effort. Ellie watched understanding dawn across his features, followed by cold fury. He's been destroying my reputation. The cattle rustling accusations, the frozen bank accounts, all of it. Making me look like a criminal, so I'd be desperate enough to sell cheap or unable to fight when he moved to take it by force. Federal marshals showed up right after you left town. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, asked a lot of questions about your cattle purchases, your business practices. Someone's been feeding them false information, building a case that doesn't exist. Cole's hands clenched into fists. So even if we prove Ellie's contract is forged, I'm compromised. Can't provide protection to her because my own legal standing is under attack. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Blackwood had not simply targeted Ellie opportunistically. This was a coordinated assault designed to destroy Cole's ability to help her while simultaneously forcing him to surrender his property. Two goals, one strategy, complete annihilation. There has to be something we can do. Ellie heard the desperation in her own voice and hated it. Someone we can go to, some authority that isn't corrupted. Doc Matthews spoke up from where he had been listening silently. There might be one option. I sent a telegram to an old friend, Judge Harriet Caldwell in Denver. She's territorial circuit judge appointed by Washington, can't be bought by local interests. If we could get her to hear the case, she'd see through Blackwood immediately. Cole turned to him with the first hint of hope. Can you reach her? Get her to come here, already tried. She's overseeing a murder trial. Her trial in Boulder won't be available for at least 3 weeks. Doc's expression was apologetic. I'm sorry, it's the best option we have, and it's not fast enough. Silence fell heavy as stone. Tommy had fallen asleep on the rug by the fire, oblivious to the adult fears surrounding him. Clara fussed in her basket, and Ellie automatically reached to soothe her, the motion so practiced it required no thought. These were her children, her responsibility, her reason for continuing to breathe. And the law was going to take them from her unless she could produce money that did not exist, or evidence that had been systematically destroyed. I could mortgage the ranch. Cole's words broke the silence like a hammer through glass. Take it to the bank in Laramie somewhere Blackwood doesn't control. Raise the $2,000, pay off the debt, buy time to fight the forgery charge. Marcus shook his head immediately. Your assets are frozen, remember federal investigation. You can't mortgage or sell anything right now. That was part of Blackwood's plan, making sure you couldn't use your own resources against him. Then we find another way. Cole's voice had gone dangerous flat with certainty. I've got friends who owe me favors, men who've worked for me, men I've helped. We bring them here, arm them, dare Blackwood to try taking her by force. You'd start a range war. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. Get people killed, maybe including yourself. And the law would still side with Blackwood because legal is legal no matter how unjust. You'd be the criminal, not him. Cole moved to the fireplace, one hand braced against the mantel, staring into flames that threw dancing shadows across his face. So what then? We just give up? Let him take her and the children, because the system's rigged and there's no legal way to fight now. The word came out stronger than Ellie intended, drawing everyone's attention. No, we don't give up. We fight smart instead of hard. We find what he's vulnerable to, and we exploit it. Doc leaned forward with interest. What are you thinking? Ellie stood pacing as her mind worked through possibilities. Blackwood's operating a criminal enterprise. Human trafficking, forgery, fraud, probably bribery of public officials. Those are federal crimes. If we could get evidence to the right people, people above local corruption, he'd go to prison, and all his legal claims would be void. Getting evidence means getting close to him. Marcus pointed out the obvious problem. Means someone risking themselves to find proof. Then I'll do it. Ellie spoke before fully thinking through the implications. I'll go to him, agree to negotiate, get inside his operation long enough to find something we can use. Absolutely not. Cole turned from the fire, his expression fierce. You walk into his hands and you won't walk out. We've just established he traffics women. You think he'd hesitate to dispose of you once he has what he wants? Then what's your solution? Ellie met his anger with her own. Wait for help that won't arrive in time. Hide here while he gets the sheriff and legal force to drag us all out. Watch my children taken because we were too afraid to act. There was a beat of heavy silence before Sarah spoke up. She's right, Cole. We're running out of time and options. But she can't go alone and unprotected. We need a plan that keeps her safe while getting what we need. Over the next hour, they built something that resembled strategy. Ellie would write to Blackwood requesting a meeting to discuss terms of repayment. Doc Matthews would accompany her as neutral party and witness. Marcus would follow at a distance with two other ranch hands, staying close enough to intervene if things went wrong. Meanwhile, Cole would ride to Laramie to meet with a federal marshal Doc knew personally, one who allegedly could not be bought. It was desperate and dangerous and relied on too many things going right. But it was something. It was action instead of helpless waiting. Tommy woke as they were finalizing details, rubbing his eyes and looking for his mother. Ellie gathered him close, breathing in his little boy's smell, memorizing the weight of him, in case this was her last chance to hold him safely. He wrapped his arms around her neck with the absolute trust only children possessed. I had a bad dream, Mama. Dream the bad man took you away. Just a dream, baby. I'm right here. But she was lying. In 3 days, she would walk directly toward the bad man's grasp, gambling that she could survive long enough to destroy him. The odds were not in her favor. The odds had never been in her favor. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had gone quiet, Ellie found herself standing by the window in the main room, staring out at snowfields, silver under a half moon. Behind her, she heard footsteps, knew without looking. It was Cole. You don't have to do this. His voice was soft, almost gentle. We can find another way. We've been over this. There is no other way. Then let me go instead. Let me confront Blackwood. Get the evidence. Ellie turned to face him, studying the lines of his face in moonlight, filtered through frost-covered glass. He wants me, not you. I'm the leverage, the bait. You going accomplishes nothing except getting yourself killed, and then who protects my children? Cole moved closer, stopping just shy of touching distance. I can't lose you. His words came out rough, almost angry. I know we barely know each other. Know this is happening too fast, but I can't lose you. Not after finding you. Not after... He trailed off, but Ellie understood what he could not say. Not after losing Rebecca and Daniel. Not after 3 years of grief and emptiness. Not after finally finding a reason to hope again. She closed the distance between them, her hand finding his where it hung at his side. His fingers engulfed hers, warm and calloused and solid. Then make sure I come back. Make sure that when I walk into whatever hell Blackwood has planned, there's a reason waiting for me to survive it. Cole's other hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with surprising gentleness for such a hard man. I'll burn his whole operation to the ground if I have to. Whatever it takes to get you back safe. They stood like that for a long moment, the space between them charged with everything unspoken. Then Cole leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to her forehead. Not a kiss of passion, but of promise of protection, of something deeper than either of them had words for yet. When he pulled back, his eyes held that fierce protectiveness she was starting to recognize as fundamental to who he was. Sleep. You'll need your strength for what's coming. After he left, Ellie remained by the window long into the night. She thought about Michael, about the good years before gambling destroyed him. She thought about the life she had planned, the future that had died with her husband. And she thought about Cole, about this unexpected second chance at something resembling happiness, about children playing safely in a warm house, about the possibility of building something new from the ruins of what had been lost. But she also thought about Harrison Blackwood's smile, about missing women who had vanished into darkness, about the terrible machinery of law and power that protected predators while sacrificing victims. And she knew that walking into his trap might be the last thing she ever did. Knew the odds of her plan working were vanishingly small. Knew she was gambling everything on a desperate hope that she could survive long enough to find evidence that might not exist. Yet what choice did she have? Waiting meant losing. Hiding meant losing. The only path forward was through the fire, and if she burned, at least she would burn fighting. Dawn came gray and cold. Ellie rose before Sarah, feeding Clara in the pre-dawn darkness, holding her daughter close and whispering promises she hoped desperately she could keep. Tommy woke next, climbing into bed beside her, and she held both her children as light slowly filled the room. This is what I'm fighting for, she thought. This exact moment. Their warmth, their trust, their absolute belief that Mama would keep them safe. I can't let them down. Won't let them down. Whatever it costs. Cole and Marcus left after breakfast, riding for Laramie with letters Doc Matthews had prepared. They would be gone, 2 days, minimum 3 if weather turned bad. That left Ellie with Sarah and Doc and the ranch hands a small fortress against forces they still did not fully understand. The day passed in strange, suspended tension. Sarah kept busy with household tasks, letting Ellie help because movement was better than sitting still with fear. They made bread, mended clothes, played with the children, normal things that felt surreal given what waited on the horizon. That evening, as Ellie was putting Tommy to bed, she heard horses outside. Many horses. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Ellie, we have visitors. The main room was crowded with women. Ellie recognized none of them, but they clearly knew who she was. A tall, blonde woman stepped forward, her dress simple but well-made, her bearing confident, despite being in a stranger's house. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Lily Chen. I run the Silver Dollar Saloon in town. The name clicked. Doc Matthews had mentioned her, said she had information about Blackwood's other victims. Ellie managed a nod, suddenly conscious of her borrowed dress and uncertain position in this household. Lily's smile was warm, but her eyes held something harder. I heard what's happening. Heard Blackwood's making his move and you're planning to meet with him. I came to tell you something you need to know before you walk into his hands. The other women spread out through the room, their faces showing a mixture of fear and determination. Lily continued, her voice steady. 3 years ago, my sister Mai came to Wyoming from San Francisco. She was young, pretty desperate to escape a bad situation. She borrowed money from Blackwood to pay her passage, promised to work it off legitimately. 6 months later, she disappeared. Official story was she ran off with a cowboy, but Mai would never have left without telling me. Would never have abandoned the plan we made together. Ellie's stomach clenched. Blackwood took her. Lily nodded, her jaw tight. I spent 2 years searching. Asked questions, followed leads, bribed people who might know something. Know what I found? Nothing official. But unofficially, I found 3 other women who disappeared under similar circumstances. All borrowed from Blackwood. All young and desperate. All gone without trace. Doc Matthews had mentioned this, but hearing it from someone who had lost family made it viscerally real. Ellie glanced at the other women in the room, seeing their tense postures, their worried faces. These are their families. Sisters, mothers, friends of the missing women, some of them. Lily gestured to a small, dark-haired woman. Rose's daughter Maria vanished last year. The tall woman by the door, Catherine, her niece, disappeared in 1885. We started finding each other, comparing stories. Realized we're not alone. Realized there's a pattern. Sarah had been listening from near the fireplace. Now she spoke up, her voice tight with controlled anger. Why didn't you go to the law? We did. Lily's laugh was bitter. Sheriff Porter told us women like our relatives were probably working in brothels, that they ran off because that's what their kind does. Judge Morrison refused to even hear our petitions. The marshal said it was a local matter. Every door we knocked on got slammed in our faces because they were poor, foreign, or working women, because the system doesn't value certain lives. Ellie understood the truth with terrible clarity. Because Blackwood owns the people who should protect you. Exactly. Lily moved closer, her expression intense. So when I heard you were planning to meet with him, planning to walk into his office like you can negotiate with a predator, I had to come warn you. Whatever he promises, whatever deal he offers, it's a lie. He'll take you and your children, and you'll disappear, just like my sister, just like all of them. The words hung in the air like smoke. Ellie looked at these women who had lost people they loved, who had spent years searching for justice or closure or simple acknowledgement that their pain mattered. They had come here to warn her to share information that might save her life. And what they offered was confirmation of her worst fears. I know it's dangerous, Ellie forced her voice to remain steady, but I don't have other options. In 4 days, Blackwood comes with the sheriff and legal papers to take my children. Either I find evidence to stop him, or I lose everything that matters. Rosa, the small, dark-haired woman, stepped forward. Her English was accented but clear. My Maria, she was a smart girl, kept records, wrote everything down. Before she disappeared, she told me Blackwood made her sign papers she didn't understand. Made her put fingerprint in blood on contracts she couldn't read because English was not good enough. I think he does this to many women, makes them sign things in their own blood, so later he can claim they agreed willingly. Blood contracts, Doc Matthews leaned forward with sharp interest. That's signature technique in some criminal organizations. Makes the document seem more binding, more legitimate, harder to challenge later, because the victim signed willingly even if under duress or deception. Lily produced a worn leather journal from her coat. I've been documenting everything I can find. Dates women disappeared, circumstances. What little testimony I could gather from people who saw them with Blackwood. It's not legal evidence, not proof that would hold up in court. But it's a pattern, and patterns can become evidence if the right person examines them. She held the journal out to Ellie, who took it with trembling hands. The pages were covered in neat handwriting, names and dates, and heartbreaking details. Here was Mai Chen, age 19, last seen boarding a train with a well-dressed gentleman. Here was Maria Gutierrez, age 22, signed an indenture contract for $200, disappeared 3 months later. Page after page of lost women, vanished lives, grief made concrete. This is evidence. Ellie looked up at Lily with growing understanding. This proves the pattern Doc mentioned. We get this to the right federal officials, they have to investigate. It's a start. Doc took the journal, flipping through pages with careful attention. Combined with my research on the forged contracts, this paints a picture of systematic criminal activity. But we still need hard evidence directly tying Blackwood to specific crimes. We need documents from his office, testimony from someone inside his operation, something that would force federal marshals to act immediately rather than launching a slow investigation. Which brings us back to the original problem. Ellie closed her eyes, briefly gathering strength. Someone needs to get inside his operation and find that evidence. And since he wants me anyway, I'm the logical choice. Catherine, the tall woman by the door, spoke up for the first time. Her voice was cultured, educated, carrying authority. I used to be a school teacher before my niece disappeared. Lost my position because I wouldn't stop asking questions, wouldn't accept the official story. I've spent 3 years learning everything I could about Harrison Blackwood and how he operates. If you're going to walk into his trap, you should understand exactly what you're facing. Over the next hour, Catherine laid out Blackwood's operation with disturbing precision. He targeted vulnerable women, offered loans or help, got them to sign contracts under duress or deception. Once he had legal custody, he moved them quickly, usually within a week. Transportation was always at night, usually in closed wagons. Destinations varied, but patterns suggested connections to mining camps in Montana, railroad construction sites in Utah, brothels in San Francisco's Chinese Quarter. He never keeps them local where people might recognize them. Catherine's finger traced routes on a map she had spread across the table. Ships them far away where they have no support, no language skills, no way to escape. Most never resurface. The few who tried to come back either disappeared again or died under suspicious circumstances. The room had gone very quiet. Even Sarah, who had seen much in her years, looked shaken by the systematic nature of it. Ellie felt cold spreading through her chest, understanding finally the full scope of what she was proposing to walk into. But she also felt something else. Rage. Clean and sharp and focusing. These women's stories, their missing relatives, their years of fruitless searching represented a pattern of evil that thrived because good people did nothing. Because the system protected predators. Because men like Blackwood understood that certain lives were considered disposable. Well, she was not disposable. Her children were not disposable. And she was done being afraid. I'm still going. Her voice cut through the heavy silence. But not alone and not unprepared. I need all of you to help me build a plan that actually works. They talked through the night, women who had been strangers hours before now united by shared purpose. Lily knew Blackwood's routine, his habits, his weaknesses. Catherine had maps and documented connections. Rosa contributed details about the blood contracts and how they were presented. Doc Matthews added legal expertise and medical knowledge. Sarah provided practical ranch wisdom about how to hide weapons and create escape routes. By dawn, they had something resembling a real strategy. Ellie would request a meeting with Blackwood at his office in town and ostensibly to negotiate payment terms. Doc Matthews would accompany her as witness and protection. But hidden in her dress would be a small knife Lily provided and a vial of sleeping powder Doc prepared. If opportunity arose, she would drug Blackwood's coffee, search his office for documents, and get out before he woke. If that failed, she would still have the knife in the knowledge that rescue was coming. Because that was the second part of the plan. Marcus and ranch hands would be positioned around Blackwood's building ready to intervene at the first sign of trouble. And Cole, returning from Laramie with hopefully a federal marshal, would arrive with legal authority to raid the premises if needed. It was still dangerous, still likely to fail in numerous ways. But it was better than walking in blind and hoping for the best. As the women prepared to leave, riding back to town in the gray morning light, Lily took Ellie's hands in hers. My sister Mai, she was brave like you. Thought she could handle Blackwood, thought she was smart enough to outmaneuver him. But bravery isn't enough against men who have no conscience. Promise me you'll be careful. Promise me you won't become another name in my journal. Ellie squeezed her hands, feeling the strength in them, the shared understanding of women who had been forced to be harder than they should have needed to be. I promise to fight like hell. That's the best I can offer. Lily's smile was sad but genuine. Then that will have to be enough. Good luck, Mrs. Morrison. All of us will be praying you succeed where we failed. After they left, Ellie stood on the porch watching snow blow across the landscape in ghostly patterns. The sun was rising red and cold, promising a harsh day. Inside, Clara was crying for her morning feeding, and Tommy would wake soon wanting breakfast and reassurance. Normal life continuing, despite the storm gathering on the horizon. Sarah joined her on the porch, wrapping a shawl around both their shoulders against the bite of wind. Cole's going to be furious when he finds out you've been planning this without him. Let him be furious. Ellie's voice was flat. He's not the one Blackwood wants. He's not the one with 4 days until losing everything. This is my fight, and I'll fight it my way. But it was more than that, and they both knew it. Ellie had been powerless too long, watching Michael die, slowly watching debts pile up, watching doors close in her face. Walking into Blackwood's trap was the first choice she had made in months that felt like agency rather than reaction. Dangerous agency, possibly fatal agency, but hers nonetheless. When Cole returned that evening, exhausted from hard riding, he found the house quiet and Ellie feeding Clara by the fire. His face lightened at the sight, some tension easing from his shoulders. Then he noticed the journal on the table, the map still spread across the desk, the atmosphere of decisions made in his absence. What happened while I was gone? Ellie told him everything. About Lily Chen and the missing women, about the blood contracts and Catherine's maps, about the plan they had built, the risks they would take, the evidence they needed to find. She watched his expression shift from confusion to understanding to the fury Sarah had predicted. Absolutely not. His voice was hard as stone. You're not walking into his office like bait in a trap. We'll find another way. There is no other way, and you know it. Ellie kept her voice level despite the anger rising to meet his. Did you bring the federal marshal? Cole's jaw clenched. He'll come, but not for another week. Said he needs more evidence before he can justify territorial intervention in local civil disputes. Even showed him Doc's research, and he said it was compelling but circumstantial. So we're still alone, still on our own timeline, still running out of options. Which doesn't mean we resort to suicide missions. Cole crossed the room in 3 long strides. Ellie, listen to me. I've seen men like Blackwood before. They don't negotiate, they don't honor agreements. You walk into his office and the only way you're leaving is if we carry you out, and that's if we're lucky enough to find your body. Then what's your solution? Ellie stood, Clara still cradled against her chest. Hide here until he comes with the sheriff fight. A legal battle we can't win. Watch him take my children because we were too afraid to act decisively. The word hung between them, sharp-edged and terrible. Clara whimpered at the tension in Ellie's body, and she forced herself to relax, rocking gently, breathing through the anger that wanted to consume her. Cole's voice came out quieter but no less intense. I can't lose you. Not after everything. Please don't make me watch another woman I care about walk toward death. And there it was, the truth underneath his anger. Fear of loss, terror of grief revisited the raw wound of Rebecca and Daniel still bleeding beneath scar tissue that had never fully healed. Ellie stepped closer, one hand reaching up to touch his face, feeling the rough scrape of stubble beneath her palm. I'm not Rebecca. I'm not walking unprepared into a storm. I'm walking deliberately into a fight with weapons and allies and a plan. Maybe it's not a good plan. Maybe the odds are terrible, but it's action instead of waiting to be destroyed. Can you understand that Cole's hand covered hers where it rested on his cheek, his eyes closing briefly? I understand you're terrified of being helpless again. Understand you'd rather die fighting than live knowing you gave up. But understanding doesn't mean I can accept it. You don't have to accept it. Just don't stop me. They stood locked in that moment, two wills opposed, two fears colliding. Then Clara made an indignant sound, tired of being caught between adults and their incomprehensible tensions. The spell broke. Cole stepped on back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration and defeated acceptance. Fine. You're determined to do this idiocy, then I'm coming with you. You, me, Doc Matthews, and enough armed men to start a small war. No. Ellie's voice was firm. You're compromised. Remember federal investigation into your affairs. You show up with armed men and it looks like criminal conspiracy. Gives Blackwood ammunition to paint you as the threat and himself as the victim. You have to stay clean, stay removed, so when this is over, you can still provide legal protection to me and the children. Cole looked like he wanted to argue further, but Sarah intervened from the doorway, where she had been discreetly listening. She's right, Cole. Hard as it is, she's right. Your value is in what you can do after, not during. Let the women and Doc handle the immediate danger. You focus on making sure there's a safe place to come back to. The defeat in Cole's posture was painful to witness. He looked suddenly older, worn by too many losses and fears he could not prevent. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. If something happens to you, if he hurts you or takes you, I'll burn his whole world to ashes. Law be damned. Consequences be damned. He'll pay for every second of fear you suffer. Ellie believed him absolutely, saw in his eyes that he meant it, that his veneer of civilization would evaporate entirely if she was harmed. The knowledge should have frightened her. Instead, she felt a fierce gratitude that someone cared enough to threaten murder on her behalf. Then make sure you're ready to act when the time comes. Make sure that if I can get evidence, there's someone prepared to use it immediately. Cole nodded slowly, something settling in his expression. Purpose, perhaps, or the grim acceptance of a man who had been forced to let go when every instinct screamed to hold tight. The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Ellie practiced hiding the knife Lily provided, learned to move naturally with the vial of sleeping powder secured in a pocket sewn specially into her dress. Doc Matthews drilled her on what to look for in Blackwood's office, what documents would constitute evidence, how to recognize the signs of immediate danger requiring abort and escape. Tommy sensed something was wrong, grew clingy and frightened. Ellie held him more than usual, memorizing his weight and warmth, the way he smelled of soap and little boy sweat, the absolute trust in his eyes when he looked at her. If she failed, if Blackwood took her, Tommy would grow up without a mother. Would Clara even remember her? Would they think she had abandoned them? Or would Cole tell them the truth? Explain that Mama had fought monsters and lost. The night before the planned meeting, Ellie could not sleep. She stood by the window in the bedroom, watching moonlight silver the snow, thinking about all the ways tomorrow could go wrong. Behind her, Clara slept in her cradle, breathing softly. Tommy sprawled across the bed, one small hand flung out as though reaching for someone, even in sleep. A soft knock at the door preceded Cole entering quietly. He had been doing this each night, checking on them, standing watch, as though his presence alone could ward off danger. Tonight he moved to stand beside her at the window, not speaking, just sharing the vigil. After a long silence, Ellie broke it, her voice barely above a whisper. If something happens tomorrow, if I don't come back, promise me you'll take care of them. Raise them like they're yours. Give them the life Michael and I wanted for them. Cole's response was immediate and fierce. Nothing's going to happen. You're coming back, and we're going to destroy Blackwood together, and then we're going to build the life you deserve. But if no, his hand found hers in the darkness. No if. You're stronger than he is, smarter, more determined. You're going to walk into his office, get what we need, and walk back out. And then we're done being afraid, done running, done letting men like him dictate what happens to good people. Ellie wanted desperately to believe him, wanted to think courage and determination were enough to overcome systematic corruption and violent men. But she had learned too much about how the world actually worked, how power and money insulated evil from consequences. Still, she squeezed his hand and allowed herself a moment of hope. Maybe they would succeed. Maybe justice existed after all. Maybe the universe contained more than cruelty and loss. And if not, at least she would die fighting. At least her children would know their mother had been brave to the end. That was worth something. Cole seemed to read her thoughts. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind his chin, resting on top of her head. I won't let him take you. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that. If things go wrong, I'll be there. Law or no law, consequences or no consequences. You're not facing him alone. They stood like that until the first gray hints of dawn, two people trying to hold back the inevitable, knowing the storm was coming, but pretending for just a moment that it might pass them by. It did not. The morning arrived with brutal clarity, sky pale and hard as bone. Ellie dressed with care, the knife strapped to her thigh beneath layers of petticoats, the vial of sleeping powder sewn into a hidden pocket at her waist. She checked her appearance in the small mirror, seeing a woman who looked older than her 27 years. Lines of hardship etched around her eyes, but also something new. Determination. The kind that came from having nothing left to lose and everything to protect. Tommy clung to her skirts as she prepared to leave, his small face crumpled with fear he could not articulate. Ellie knelt to his level, taking his hands in hers. I need you to be very brave today. Can you do that for Mama? Where are you going to talk to some people? Make sure we can stay here with Mr. Cole and Miss Sarah. Make sure the bad man can't hurt us anymore. Tommy's lower lip trembled, but he nodded, trying to be the man he thought she needed him to be. The sight broke her heart. 4 years old and already learning that the world required bravery beyond his years. Sarah appeared with Clara, the baby freshly fed and content. She pressed the child into Ellie's arms for a long moment, understanding without words that this might be the last time. Ellie held her daughter close, breathing in that particular baby smell of milk and innocence, memorizing the weight and warmth. Come back to them. Sarah's voice was quiet but fierce. Whatever it takes, come back. Doc Matthews waited by the wagon, his black bag in hand, his weathered face set in grim lines. Marcus stood nearby with 2 other ranch hands, all armed beneath their coats, all trying to look casual rather than terrified. Cole was nowhere visible, but Ellie knew he was watching from somewhere, unable to stay away entirely, despite the plan requiring his absence. The ride to town took 30 minutes that felt like 30 seconds. Ellie's mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, what she would say, how she would act, when to strike, and when to retreat. Doc sat beside him, his presence solid and reassuring, but they both knew he was an old man against whatever violence Blackwood might employ. His real value was as witness, as someone who could testify later about what happened, assuming anyone survived to testify. The town appeared through morning mist, buildings stark against snow. Blackwood's office occupied a prime corner location, 2 stories of brick and glass that spoke of money and permanence. Ellie's stomach clenched at the sight. Somewhere inside those walls were the documents they needed, the evidence that would expose his crimes. Or somewhere inside was a trap that would swallow her whole. Marcus and his men took positions in the general store across the street, the saloon next door, the stable behind. To casual observation, they were ranch hands on errands. To anyone paying attention, they were soldiers preparing for war. Doc helped Ellie down from the wagon, his grip on her arm steady. You don't have to do this. Even now, we could turn around. Yes, I do. We both know there's no other way. They climbed the steps to Blackwood's office, each footfall echoing too loud in the morning quiet. The door was heavy oak with frosted glass bearing gold letters, Blackwood Land and Investment Company. Professional, legitimate, a facade over darkness. Inside, a clerk looked up from his desk, a thin young man with spectacles and nervous energy. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of them. Mrs. Morrison, Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. He gestured toward an inner door. Please go right in. The office beyond was everything Ellie had imagined. Rich mahogany desk leather chairs, books lining one wall, a safe in the corner. Windows overlooked the main street, offering a view of everything happening below. And behind the desk sat Harrison Blackwood, silver-haired and handsome in the way of predators who had learned to disguise their nature. "Mrs. Morrison, how delightful that you've reconsidered our arrangement." His smile was warm, welcoming, utterly false. "And Dr. Matthews, always a pleasure." Doc's response was clipped. "I'm here as Mrs. Morrison's advocate and witness to whatever transpires." Of course," Blackwood gestured to chairs facing his desk. "Please sit. Can I offer you coffee, tea? Coffee would be appreciated." Ellie forced her voice to remain steady. "It's been a cold morning." Blackwood moved to a sideboard where a pot steamed, pouring 3 cups with practiced ease. Ellie watched carefully as he added cream and sugar, looking for any sign he was drugging them. But his movements were casual, unhurried, and he drank from his own cup immediately upon returning to his desk. So he leaned back in his chair, studying Ellie with unsettling intensity. "You received my correspondence regarding your late husband's debts. I trust you've come to discuss terms of repayment. I've come to understand the situation." Ellie sipped her coffee, feeling the vial of sleeping powder press against her ribs. "The contract you claim exists. I have no memory of Michael signing it. No documentation in our personal records. Can you show me the original?" Something flickered in Blackwood's eyes, too fast to identify. "Of course." He opened a drawer, producing papers with a flourish. "Signed and witnessed, as you can see. Your husband borrowed $2,000 to cover gambling losses. The terms were clear, if brutal by today's standards. In the event of his death, the debt transfers to his estate, which in this case means you and the children." Ellie forced herself to examine the document with apparent care, though her real attention was on the office itself. The safe in the corner, the locked cabinets along one wall, the desk drawers. Somewhere in this room was the real evidence, the documents showing his pattern of forgery and trafficking. The signature looks like Michael's hand, but the date is wrong. He was bedridden with consumption on this date, too weak to travel to town. Blackwood's smile never wavered. "I brought the papers to him, a courtesy for a dying man, and the witnesses business associates of mine, happy to testify in court if necessary." Every answer was smooth, prepared, impossible to challenge without proof. Ellie felt the trap closing, but pushed forward, buying time for the sleeping powder to do its work once she could get it into his coffee. "I want to negotiate payment terms. I have some resources, jewelry I could sell, skills I could employ. Perhaps we could arrange a schedule that would satisfy the debt without indentured servitude." Blackwood's expression shifted, something hungry moving behind his eyes. "I'm always open to creative arrangements. Perhaps we could discuss this more privately, Dr. Matthews. I'm sure you have other patients requiring attention." Doc's response was firm. "I'm staying." The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Blackwood's pleasant facade cracked slightly, revealing something colder underneath. "Mrs. Morrison, let's be honest. You have no resources, no skills of sufficient value, no prospects for generating $2,000. The jewelry you mention is worth perhaps $50 at best. You're wasting both our time with these negotiations when we both know how this ends." "And how does it end?" Ellie kept her voice level, despite fear crawling up her spine. "You sign custody of yourself and children over to me for the duration of the debt period. I place you in appropriate employment where you can work off what's owed. When the debt is satisfied, you're free to go. Simple, legal, exactly as the contract stipulates. And if I refuse, then I appear before Judge Morrison with the sheriff in 3 days and have you forcibly removed from Brennan's ranch. The children will be taken into custody, and you'll face additional charges of debt evasion and failure to honor legal obligations. Your situation will be considerably worse than it is now." Ellie felt rage burning through the fear. This man sat here, threatening to enslave her and her children, speaking in calm tones as though discussing whether confident in his power and immunity. And he was right to be confident. The law was on his side, the judge was in his pocket. She had no proof, no resources, no way to fight through legitimate means, which meant she would have to fight illegitimately. "I need a moment to think." She stood, moving toward the window as though gathering her thoughts. In reality, she was checking positions, seeing Marcus in the general store, another ranch hand visible near the stable. Help was close, but not close enough if things went wrong immediately. Blackwood also stood moving around the desk with predatory grace. Take all the time you need. But understand something, Mrs. Morrison. Your husband took something from me. More than money. He cost me a lucrative opportunity through his incompetence and weakness. You're going to replace what I lost one way or another. I always collect what's owed. What did he take? The question came out before Ellie could stop it. Blackwood's smile widened, showing too many teeth. Information. Your late husband was briefly employed as a clerk in my office, helping organize land records. He discovered certain irregularities in my transactions and threatened to report them to territorial authorities. I couldn't allow that, of course. So I destroyed his credibility, first set up the gambling debts, made sure no one would believe anything he said. Then the fire that killed him was most convenient, destroyed any evidence he might have gathered. You killed Michael. The words came out flat, certain. I did nothing. A lamp left burning, tragic accident, these things happen. But yes, I ensured he couldn't interfere with my business. And now you're going to ensure his death wasn't wasted by serving a purpose he never could. Ellie's hand moved to the vial at her waist, fingers closing around it. This was confession. This was admission of murder. If Doc had heard if they could get out and testify, this alone might be enough. But Blackwood was still talking, too confident to care about witnesses. You see, I've built something rather impressive here. A network that moves women from desperate situations into profitable ones. Mining camps need entertainment. Railroad crews need comfort. Chinese brothels need fresh product. I supply demand and get rich doing it. Your husband threatened that. You'll help restore it. The vial was open now, concealed in her hand. Ellie turned from the window, moving back toward the desk where her coffee cup sat half full. I need to understand something. How many women have you done this to? How many have disappeared into your network? Blackwood seemed pleased by the question, eager to boast to someone who would soon be unable to repeat it. In 5 years, perhaps 30. Though only the young, attractive ones go to the profitable locations. The older or damaged ones get domestic service assignments, legitimate indenture, where they work off debts in kitchens and laundries. Less money, but still profitable. And the women who resist, who try to escape, they learn that resistance has consequences. Or they don't learn and they disappear permanently. He was still talking when Ellie picked up her coffee cup, pretending to drink, but instead dumping the vial's contents into his cup while his attention was on Doc. The powder dissolved instantly, colorless and odorless, just as Doc had promised. She set her cup down and moved back toward the window, heart pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. I think I need more time to consider. This is a significant decision. Blackwood picked up his cup, sipping as he moved around the desk. You have 3 days. But Mrs. Morrison, understand that delay only worsens your position. I'm offering you a chance to cooperate willingly. If you force legal proceedings, things become much less pleasant. He drank again, deeper this time. Ellie watched from the corner of her eye, counting seconds, praying Doc's estimation of the powder's potency was accurate. 5 minutes, Doc had said. 5 minutes until drowsiness, 10 until unconsciousness. The conversation continued, Blackwood explaining terms and conditions, Ellie asking questions she did not care about, Doc interjecting occasionally to clarify legal points. And slowly, gradually, Blackwood's words began to slur. His eyes drooped. He shook his head as though clearing cobwebs, confusion crossing his features. I don't... He stood abruptly, staggered, caught himself on the desk. What did you... Doc was already moving, catching Blackwood as he fell, lowering him into his chair with surprising strength for an old man. The silver-haired predator slumped, unconscious, mouth slack, all his polished menace evaporating into simple helplessness. How long do we have? Ellie was already at the safe, examining its lock. 15 minutes before he starts waking. Maybe 20 if we're lucky. Doc moved to the door, locking it, pulling the curtain across the window to obscure them from outside view. Be quick. The safe required a combination they did not have. Ellie abandoned it, moving to the desk drawers instead. The first held ordinary business papers, land transactions, correspondence about legitimate investments. The second was locked. She grabbed a letter opener from the desk, jimmying the mechanism until it snapped open. Inside were leather-bound ledgers. Ellie pulled them out with shaking hands, flipping pages, seeing names and dates and amounts. Here were records of loans and contracts. Here were notations about shipments and destinations. Here in Blackwood's own handwriting was documentation of his entire criminal enterprise. This is it. She looked up at Doc with wild hope. This proves everything. The forgeries, the trafficking, all of it. Doc was already gathering papers, stuffing them into his bag. Take what we can carry. We need to move before the door handle rattled. Someone was trying to enter from outside. The clerk's voice came through the wood, nervous and confused. Mr. Blackwood, is everything all right? Sir Doc and Ellie froze, staring at each other. They had perhaps seconds before the clerk fetched help or forced the door. Ellie made a decision, grabbing what ledgers she could carry, shoving them inside her coat. Doc grabbed more papers, cramming them into his bag with no regard for order. The window. Ellie crossed the office in 3 strides, throwing up the sash. Cold air flooded in. Below was a 10-foot drop to an alley, snow piled deep enough to cushion the fall somewhat. We have to jump. Doc looked at the drop, then at Blackwood, still unconscious in his chair. You first. I'll hand down the evidence, then follow. No time to argue. Ellie climbed onto the sill, the ledgers pressed against her chest beneath her coat, and jumped. The landing was hard, but the snow absorbed most of the impact. She rolled, came up covered in white powder, and looked up to see Doc dropping the bag to her. She caught it, staggered under the weight, then watched as the old man climbed through with surprising agility. The clerk was pounding on the door now, his voice rising in panic. Doc landed beside Ellie, grunting with impact, but staying on his feet. Move! Now! They ran through the alley, boots slipping on ice, the evidence bouncing awkwardly as they moved. Behind them came shouts, the door splintering as the clerk and others broke through. Ellie's lungs burned, but she pushed harder, following Doc toward where the wagon waited 2 streets over. Marcus appeared from the general store, seeing their flight, understanding immediately that something had gone wrong. He and his men converged on them, forming a protective wall, hands on weapons. What happened? Got the evidence. Blackwood's unconscious, but not for long. We need to move now. They were loading into the wagon when gunfire cracked across the morning air. A bullet spanged off metal somewhere behind them. Marcus shoved Ellie down, returning fire toward Blackwood's office, where men were spilling out, some armed, all furious. Go! Marcus slapped the wagon, sending it lurching forward. Doc whipped the horses into a gallop, completely inappropriate for town streets, but necessary for survival. Behind them, the gunfight continued, Marcus and the ranch hands providing covering fire as they retreated toward their own horses. Ellie clutched the ledgers and bag to her chest, bent low in the wagon as bullets whistled overhead. This was it. They had the evidence, but Blackwood would come for them now with everything he had. The legal fiction of legitimacy was over. Now it was just war. The ride back to the ranch was a blur of speed and terror. Doc pushed the horses harder than was safe, the wagon skidding on icy patches, threatening to overturn on curves. Ellie held on and prayed, watching behind them for pursuit. It came within minutes, riders pouring out of town, maybe 8 or 10, all armed and clearly intent on reclaiming what had been stolen. The ranch appeared ahead, and Ellie saw immediately that Cole had not stayed away as planned. He and Sarah stood on the porch with rifles. Tommy and Clara saw safely inside the house, prepared for siege. As the wagon careened into the yard, Cole was already moving, helping Ellie down, his eyes scanning her for injuries. You're hurt. No, we got it. We got everything. But there was no time for celebration. The pursuing riders were visible now, closing fast. Cole's expression went hard as granite. Inside. Now, Doc, how many? 10 that I saw. Maybe more coming. Cole shouted orders to ranch hands who had appeared from various buildings, everyone moving with practiced efficiency to defensive positions. The ranch had been built with security in mind, windows placed to allow overlapping fields of fire, thick walls that would stop most bullets. They had maybe 2 minutes before the attackers arrived. Sarah grabbed Ellie as she entered, steering her toward the study. Take the evidence and hide it. If they overrun us, if something happens, that cannot fall back into Blackwood's hands. Ellie nodded, gathering the ledgers and papers, looking for secure hiding places. The floorboards in the corner, Sarah had mentioned they were loose, installed deliberately during a more violent era of frontier life. Ellie pried them up, stuffing the evidence into the space beneath, covering it again just as gunfire erupted outside. The first volley shattered windows in the main room. Ellie dropped flat by instinct, covering her head as glass rained down. Then Cole's rifle answered the boom, deafening an enclosed space. More guns joined Sarah and Doc and ranch hands, all returning fire, turning the ranch into a fortress of sound and smoke. Ellie crawled toward the bedroom where the children were hidden, found Tommy under the bed, his hands over his ears, his face white with terror. Clara wailed in her basket, the sound nearly lost in the chaos. Ellie pulled them both close, her body a shield, her voice attempting soothing words that were useless against the reality of violence surrounding them. The battle lasted 15 minutes but felt like hours. Blackwood's men tried to rush the house twice, were driven back both times by concentrated fire. Then came a lull, ominous in its silence. Ellie heard Cole's voice from the main room, tense but controlled. They're regrouping, probably waiting for reinforcements or trying to figure out how to burn us out. Sarah's response was grim. We can't hold indefinitely. We need help. I sent Marcus to fetch the marshal. Doc's voice sounded older, more tired. But he's 3 hours away at minimum. We need to survive until then. A new voice joined the conversation, muffled by distance but unmistakable. Harrison Blackwood, still groggy from the drugs but conscious enough to coordinate his men. He was shouting something about the house, about fire, about making sure nobody got out alive with his records. Cole's response was immediate and decisive. Ellie, take the children to the root cellar. There's a tunnel that leads to the barn. If they fire the house, you run. Don't wait for us. Don't look back. Just take those children and get as far away as possible. I'm not leaving you. You don't have a choice. His face was set in lines that allowed no argument. Those children need you more than I need you to die beside me. Now move. Sarah was already guiding them toward the back of the house, through the kitchen, to a trap door concealed beneath a rug. The root cellar below was dark and cold, smelling of earth and stored vegetables. A tunnel branched off one side, low and narrow, reinforced with timbers. Sarah handed Ellie a lantern, goes under the yard to the barn, opens behind the tool rack. From there you can get to horses, get away before they know you're gone. But as Ellie descended with the children, a new sound froze everyone in place. Hoofbeats, many hoofbeats approaching fast from the direction of town. Reinforcements for Blackwood Doom riding toward them on horseback. Except the shooting that followed came from the wrong direction. The attackers began falling, their return fire confused and panicked. Ellie climbed back up to see what was happening, Tommy clinging to her skirts, Clara pressed against her chest. Through the broken window she saw riders in the yard, but not Blackwood's men. These wore badges, federal marshals and territorial deputies, at least 20 of them surrounding the remaining attackers with overwhelming force. And at the head of the rescue rode Marcus, flanked by a stern-faced man in a long coat, who could only be the federal marshal Doc had contacted. Within minutes it was over. Blackwood's men surrendered or fled. The marshal dismounted, taking in the scene with a practiced eye, then entered the house with hand on weapon, ready for anything. Who's in charge here? Cole stepped forward, rifle still in hand but pointed down. Cole Brennan, this is my ranch. Those men attacked us after we recovered evidence of criminal activity from Harrison Blackwood's office. The marshal's expression was skeptical. That's a serious accusation. What evidence? Ellie came forward, Doc's bag and the ledgers in her arms. Records of human trafficking, forgery, bribery, and murder, all documented in Mr. Blackwood's own handwriting. The marshal took the materials, flipping through pages, his face growing progressively more grim. When he looked up, something like respect flickered in his eyes. This is substantial, detailed. If it's authentic, it's enough to bring him up on federal charges. It's authentic. Doc Matthews stepped forward. I witnessed Mrs. Morrison obtaining it directly from Blackwood's locked desk. He also confessed to murdering her late husband before we drugged him and fled with the evidence. The marshal stared at them for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if this was the most audacious criminal enterprise he had ever seen or genuine justice seekers who had taken matters into their own hands. You drugged a prominent businessman, broke into his office, stole his private papers, and fled. He confessed to trafficking at least 30 women over 5 years. Ellie's voice was steady despite exhaustion and terror still coursing through her veins. He threatened to enslave me and my children through forged debt contracts. We did what we had to do because the local law is corrupted and he owns the judge. If what we did is criminal, then arrest us. But those records prove systematic abuse that needs to stop. The marshal considered this, then gestured to his deputies. Go into town. I want Harrison Blackwood in custody immediately. And bring me Judge Morrison and Sheriff Porter. Time we had a conversation about justice in this territory. As deputies rode off, the marshal turned back to Ellie and Cole. You're lucky I arrived when I did. Another few minutes and this could have been a massacre. How did you get here so fast? Cole frowned. Marcus left less than 2 hours ago. I was already coming. The marshal's expression softened slightly. Got a telegram yesterday from Judge Caldwell in Denver. She'd been contacted by Doc Matthews here and several women about a pattern of missing persons. Told me to get down here immediately and investigate. I was already on my way when your man found me on the road. Lily. Ellie felt a surge of gratitude toward the saloon owner who had helped them. She kept pushing after we met, kept contacting authorities until someone listened. Over the next hours, the full scope of Blackwood's operation became clear. The ledgers documented everything with meticulous detail, the man's arrogance ensuring he kept perfect records of his crimes. Names of women taken, destinations, amounts paid by buyers, bribes to officials. Even the forged contracts were cataloged, Blackwood apparently proud of his handiwork. When deputies returned with Blackwood in custody, he was still groggy from the sleeping powder, his silver hair disheveled, his expensive clothes torn from the earlier violence. He looked at Ellie with pure hatred, all his polished charm evaporated. You stupid bitch. You have no idea what you've done. The people I work with, they'll come for you. They'll kill everyone you love. The marshal struck him across the face, a casual backhand that split Blackwood's lip. That's threatening a witness. Add it to the list. Judge Morrison and Sheriff Porter proved less defiant when confronted with evidence of their complicity. The judge tried to claim ignorance, said he had simply processed legitimate legal documents. The sheriff attempted to flee and was caught a mile outside town. Both were arrested alongside Blackwood, charged as accessories to trafficking and fraud. As the sun set on that terrible day, the ranch slowly returned to something resembling peace. The wounded were treated, the dead removed, the damage assessed. Ellie sat on the porch steps with Clara in her arms, Tommy asleep beside her, watching the last of the federal deputies ride away with their prisoners. Cole joined her, moving stiffly from a wound he refused to admit hurt. He sat without speaking, his shoulder pressing against hers, solid and warm and alive. They stayed like that as darkness fell, and stars emerged sharp and cold in the winter sky. Eventually, Cole broke the silence. It's over. You're safe now. The children are safe. Blackwood will hang for what he's done. Ellie nodded but could not quite believe it. The past months had taught her that safety was temporary, that terrible things could always come from nowhere, that the universe contained more cruelty than mercy. Cole seemed to understand her silence. His hand found hers. I know you're afraid to trust it, afraid to believe the nightmare's actually over. But I promise you, Ellie Morrison, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you and those children know what safety feels like. Real safety. The kind that doesn't vanish when you close your eyes. Ellie turned to look at him. This man who had pulled her from snow and given her shelter and fought beside her against monsters. In the dim light from the house behind them, she could see the lines of his face, the gray threading through his dark hair, the scars of a hard life written on his skin. But she could also see warmth, integrity, a capacity for love he had thought lost with Rebecca and Daniel. I'm broken, she said quietly. Michael's death, the debts, everything with Blackwood. I'm not whole anymore. I don't know if I'll ever be whole again. Neither am I. Cole's voice was equally quiet. Rebecca's gone and Daniel's gone, and part of me died with them. But maybe broken people can build something new together. Not replacing what we lost, but creating something different. Something that honors our grief while still choosing to live. Ellie felt tears on her face, the release of tension she had been holding for months. The fear, the desperation, the terrible weight of knowing her children's lives depended entirely on decisions she made with no good options. All of it poured out in silent tears that Cole did not try to stop or fix or explain away. He simply sat with her, his presence a promise that she no longer carried everything alone. When the storm passed, Ellie found her voice again. I want to stay, here with you and Sarah, build a life for Tommy and Clara, maybe figure out what comes next for us. If you'll have us. Cole's response was immediate. There's nothing I want more. But there would be time for that later. Time to explore what they were building, time to let grief heal and hope grow. For now, it was enough to sit together in the darkness, two survivors who had found each other in the worst possible circumstances and somehow made it through to the other side. In the weeks that followed, the full scope of Blackwood's crimes emerged. The federal investigation uncovered trafficking networks spanning 5 territories. 23 women were located and freed from various forms of captivity. 7 more were found dead, their bodies recovered from shallow graves. The trials were lengthy and public, drawing attention from newspapers across the nation. Blackwood hanged in spring. Judge Morrison and Sheriff Porter received life sentences. Lesser conspirators faced varying terms of imprisonment. Lily Chen was there when they found her sister Mai still alive in a Montana mining camp, traumatized but surviving. The reunion was captured by photographers and published widely, becoming a symbol of justice finally prevailing. Lily used her newfound fame to establish an organization helping other women search for missing relatives, funded partially by the reward money from Blackwood's capture. Ellie testified at the trial, standing before judges and juries, telling her story without shame or fear. The experience was cathartic, transforming her from victim to survivor to advocate. Other women came forward, emboldened by her courage, adding their voices to the chorus demanding change. Territorial law was amended, giving women greater legal protections, making it harder for predators to exploit systemic vulnerabilities. Through it all, Cole remained constant, not hovering or controlling, but present, supportive, creating space for Ellie to heal at her own pace. They did not rush into anything, understanding that what they were building required foundation care, patience. But slowly, over months of shared meals and children's laughter and quiet evenings by the fire, something solid took shape between them. Spring came with startling swiftness, snow melting to reveal brown earth that would soon green. Tommy helped Cole plant a garden, small hands in soil, learning how things grew with proper care. Clara took her first steps across the ranch house floor, her delight infectious, bringing smiles to faces that had known too much sorrow. One evening in late April, as the sun painted mountains gold and the air smelled of growing things, Cole found Ellie on the porch where she often sat watching the children play. Been thinking about something. He settled beside her, his movements still careful from wounds that had healed but left reminders. Wondering if maybe we should make this official. Give Tommy and Clara a father's name. Give you the legal protections that come with marriage. It was not the most romantic proposal ever offered, practical rather than poetic. But Ellie understood what he was really asking. Not just for legal arrangements, but for commitment, for family, for choosing each other deliberately, rather than simply accepting circumstance. I think she said slowly, measuring her words, that maybe we could build something good together. Not perfect, because neither of us are perfect anymore. But good, real, something worth fighting to protect. Cole's hand found hers, calloused and warm and steady. That's all I'm asking for. All I've wanted since the night I found you dying in the snow. Just a chance to build something real. They married in June in a small ceremony at the ranch. Sarah wept with joy. Doc Matthews officiated, his old hands steady as he pronounced them husband and wife. Lily Chen attended with Mai, both women smiling despite the memories that place held. Marcus stood as witness, proud of the role he had played in bringing them all safely through the fire. Tommy served as ring bearer with solemn importance, taking his duties seriously. Clara, now walking confidently, toddled down the aisle, scattering flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. The moment when Cole lifted her into his arms and she called him Papa, for the first time clear and certain, there was not a dry eye among the assembled guests. The reception spilled across the ranch grounds, neighbors and friends celebrating not just a wedding, but survival justice, the defeat of evil that had threatened to consume them all. As the evening wore on, and music played, and children ran laughing through the twilight, Ellie found herself standing apart for a moment, taking it in. This was not the life she had imagined with Michael. This was not the future they had planned in their naive youth. But it was real, and it was hers, and it was good. Tommy had a father who would teach him to be strong and kind. Clara had a home where she would grow up safe and loved. And Ellie herself had found something she had stopped believing existed. Not just safety, though that mattered. Not just provision, though they would never want for anything material. But partnership. The kind where broken pieces fit together, not despite the damage, but because of it, creating something stronger than either part alone. Cole appeared beside her, drawn by whatever instinct let him know when she needed his presence. What are you thinking? That I'm grateful. Ellie leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. That some storms destroy, but this one brought me home. Cole pressed his lips to her temple, the gesture so familiar now it felt like breathing. Then I'm grateful too, for the storm that brought you, for the courage that kept you fighting, for whatever chance gave us a second opportunity to choose life over grief. The music swelled and children laughed, and the night grew deep around them. In the distance, mountains stood eternal against stars, witnesses to human struggle, indifferent to human suffering, but also to human joy. The world contained both. Ellie understood now: cruelty and kindness, loss and discovery, endings and beginnings, woven together in a pattern too vast to comprehend from within its weaving. All she could do was live her small part of the pattern with integrity. Protect what mattered. Love fiercely the people fate had delivered to her care. And remember always that survival was not the end of the story, but merely its beginning. The ranch would continue. The children would grow. In time, there would be more children, brothers and sisters for Tommy and Clara, continuing the family Cole and Ellie built from ruins. There would be hardships because life contained those inevitably. But there would also be joy, the hard-won kind, that came from choosing to believe in possibility, even when experience suggested despair. Years later, when Tommy was grown with children of his own, he would tell the story of that winter to his sons and daughters, would speak of his mother's courage, his father's protection, the terrible man who had threatened them, and the justice that had finally prevailed. But he would also speak of something simpler and more profound, of how family was not just blood, but choice, of how love was action, not feeling, of how the hardest winters could give way to the warmest springs if you survived long enough to see them, and of how his mother, through everything, had never stopped fighting to give him and his sister the one thing that mattered most: a place to call home, where they belonged, not because they had nowhere else to go, but because home was where people fought to keep you safe, chose to keep you close, promised to never let the cold take you away. That promise, more than any other, was what Ellie Morrison Brennan kept for the rest of her life. Through seasons and years, through hardship and harvest, through every winter that came and every spring that followed, she kept her children safe. She built a life worth living, and she proved, day by patient day, that broken things could heal if given enough warmth, enough care, enough stubborn refusal to accept that damage was destiny. Some storms destroy, but this one, this terrible, beautiful storm that had nearly killed her, had instead brought her exactly where she needed to be: home.